From speculation about He Yunting's mind, criticism of his own capriciousness, and now unspeakable excitement and happiness, all came simply and dryly. Lin Han withdrew his hand and yawned, the sleepiness that had only now finally shown through the long wait, then it settled. He decided to let himself go a little further. I'm sleepy. Can you take me back? The answer, of course, was yes. He Yunting accompanied him to the public flying machine. It was late. The class towards the school, except for the intelligent pilot system, there were only 2 of them in the whole empty flying machine. Lin Han was originally sitting properly, but the flight was too smooth, and He Yunting was a person who didn't actively talk, so he really started to get sleepy after a while, and his eyelids were fighting up and down. The one beside him obviously doesn't know how to handle it better now. He was clearly reluctant to wake him up. But he was also worried that Lin Han leaned back so straight that his head would hurt when he hit the glass, so finally he did enough psychological construction and had the guts to put him on his body and let the teenager fall asleep on his lap. The whole night sky was very quiet. The world was left with a bit of his lap sound of peaceful breathing. The young man was also very good when he fell asleep, still clutching the things he gave him, quietly closing his eyes, as he had seen outside the classroom. He Yunting leaned down very gently, and his lips fell on the back of the other's hand. Without any warning, Lin Han felt a slight tickle, suddenly awake in this moment. It was as if all the coincidences in the universe didn't want us to miss it, and he understood clearly. The other person was kissing his hand, and the moment his lips came up, his mind sounded surprisingly as clean as it could get. Only when the angel was taking a nap, I was able to steal a kiss from him reverently. He Yunting didn't notice that he had woken up. And Lin Han was so glad for the first time that he had pretended to be asleep quite successfully, as well as. Fortunately, the other party didn't have mind-reading skills. Only when the flying machine arrived, Lin Han acted as if he had just woken up, rubbing his eyes and pushing open the door. The result was that he didn't look at the road when he stepped out and stumbled. Lin Han squinted and smiled, wondering if He Yunting was going to call him soft in his heart again. But whatever. He wasn't such a good angel either. He stood still, tugged on the other man's sleeve, looked up and called his name, bent his eyes. Can you carry me? He climbed on He Yunting's back, and the other man walked as steadily as he had last time. But soon he would have to send him back, so any question he had would have to be answered now. Lin Han grabbed the clothes on his shoulders, rested his head on his back, and asked him, "Are you going to be the prince's knight?" He Yunting stiffened for a moment and did not lie. Are you unhappy? No. The prince must be very good, and it's an honor to be his knight. Imperial loyalty was engraved in their bones, so Lin Han wasn't too surprised when He Yunting answered as such. Lin Han nodded. You must be the best knight too. He Yunting seemed to be afraid that Lin Han would think too much, but it's okay. I will still be the same as I am now. I won't change. If only Lin Han were a prince, I could be his knight. Is it a bad idea for me to apologize to the future prince first? Hearing this, Lin Han's heart was pounding and he put his arms around his neck and cautiously asked, So? Do you think the prince will like his knight? No, this time. He Yunting's answer was quick. He seemed to be very unconfident in this aspect, the same as when guessing whether Lin Han liked him, only daring to make assumptions, but then quickly self-denying. The prince won't like me. I'm the most boring person in the world. But the moment he heard these words, all of Lin Han's answers became clear at that moment. The prince likes you. You are the best person under the sky, you do not know it yourself. The young prince suddenly had a great deal of confidence. The future knight serves me, is loyal to me, also devoted to me. When He Yunting sent him to the door of the dormitory building, Lin Han wasn't sleepy at all when he got off his back, his cheeks were slightly red, and he was still smiling at him. He didn't understand why Lin Han was so happy, and was wondering when he heard the other call him He Yunting. He didn't call him Major, or Senior, but said his name seriously. I have a little secret I was hiding from you, don't be angry. He Yunting nodded, he would never be angry with him. He was about to ask what the secret was, but Lin Han blinked and shook his head, but my mother doesn't want me to tell. You'll understand in a few days. The teenager's eyes lit up as he shook the unimpressive gift he had received and said goodbye to He Yunting. Good night. Senior. The prince's coronation took place half a month later, as scheduled. On this day all eyes converged on one place, from the base to the fortress, from the civilian areas to the central park. The choir's melodious songs resounded through the dome, and flowers and white doves symbolized the beauty that decorated the most perfect day. Everyone was looking forward to what the prince, who had been protected for 18 years, would really look like. Because of the elimination of a lot of red tape, the core ceremony was only two, the rite of passage and knighting. Although many people in the school forum cried and wailed before that the prince stole the CP from Shaolin, at this moment, everyone would only wait for the appearance of the future prince. Will it be someone they've seen before? Or has he been raised in secrecy for 18 years and no one has ever seen his true face? My lord. I am so nervous. My lord, I am so excited. I'm so eager to know who the prince is. Ah, long live the prince. Long live the empire. In any case, young Major, he is indeed the best choice for a knight. Han Han won't be very upset either, right? After all, it's just a knight. And the Major's heart must still be filled with him. Yes. Yes. I also believe that the prince isn't so impersonal. By the way, how come I haven't seen Shaolin in the last few days? I don't know. Stop it, he's coming, Mom. I'm a little nervous. Lin Han exhaled several times, but still couldn't quite get over it. He was wearing an elaborate frock and looked towards the road he was about to walk past and said. It wasn't that he wasn't prepared. But he was just a little timid when he was finally about to face it. But it's not that Han Han doesn't actually want to. The woman reached out and gave him a final touch of the teenager's lacy lapel, right? Lin Han bit his lip and finally nodded. That'll do. The mother smiled at him. As long as you have the answer in your heart, you won't be confused. Han Han will be an adult from now on, the woman stood up, and will have a life that is more exciting than everyone else's. She concluded by gently patting the teenager's shoulder and smiling, go on. Someone's waiting for you. He Yun-ting stood in the most conspicuous position. In front of him was the red carpet. And in a few moments he would receive the sword of a prince and take an oath of eternal companionship. But there was another person on his mind. Remembering the last clause of the knight's proclamation, vow to love until death, He Yun-ting thought that he must find him first after the ceremony. It was unlikely that the prince would like him, but a teenager who had agreed to make a mecha for him would. He finally understood his heart at this moment. So he didn't want to wait and wanted to appear urgently by his side. He would be loyal to the prince. And even more devoted to a certain angel. He Yun-ting looked up at the palace in front of him. The bell rang and the moment of all eyes finally began. When the magnificent doors opened, all the beauty was gathered in one place. He was surrounded by flowers and saw a teenager. The teenager wasn't very different from his usual self, except that there was an additional crown of exquisite jewels. He remembered the little secret he had heard a few days ago, and the probing words, the prince will like you. However, He Yun-ting's surprise was only momentary, and after that moment passed, it was intertwined with loyalty and devotion. He saw the teenager's eyes cast, saw the other's accelerated pace. Saw him skip all the elaborate rituals and just walk straight up to him. The teenager's eyes had the expectation of the future, and even more vitality and warmth of vigor. He Yun-ting knelt down on one knee and put his right hand on his chest, offering his most devout self to his prince. Lin Han held his sword with both hands and gently tapped He Yun-ting's shoulder with the back of his sword before retracting it into its sheath and handing it to the man before him with both hands. He lowered his head and called his name very gently. He Yun-ting. Will you be my knight? Chapter 123. People other than He Yun-ting, especially the students of the Imperial Military University, had not yet reacted from the shock that they had been classmates with the prince for so long. It was only when they saw the gentle smiling boy bowing his head and asking for his knight, and saw He Yun-ting half kneeling and taking the sword from Lin Han, that the pop-ups, which had been paused for a moment because of the dismay, began to swipe through at a speed too dense for the naked eye to see. Quote exclamation mark exclamation mark exclamation mark quote. Quote question mark quote. Mom. I saw something. Damn. Am I blind? Am I blind, or am I still awake? I can't believe I'm in the same subject group as His Royal Highness. I am happy to explode. Ah Han Han, Han Han. I'll never say you guys can't be together again. No, it's not a matter of be or not be. His Royal Highness the Prince. His Royal Highness the Prince. You guys remember that vote for the intergalactic God's Face Prince? Right, it is said that the organizers have been waiting for the Imperial Prince to be added to the auctions after his coronation. I'll open the punch poll straight away. So this is a gentle prince hiding his identity and finally married to his knight. I'm so happy. The prince is Han Han. I'm so happy, me too. This is the picture I've always wanted to see in my dreams. Promise him, my life is worth it. I was screaming like a fool in front of the screen. The pop-ups cascaded and soon the huge screen was completely occupied. Both the viewers watching the live stream and the people who were lucky enough to be onlookers were deeply shocked by what they saw. No one blamed Lin Han for the choice. Because the moment his identity was announced, after understanding that the prince was such a teenager, everyone felt that if it was him, anything would be possible. It was better to live as a flower in a greenhouse that was protected in every way than to bloom well under the sun. Because he was a unique flower in the world. But at this moment the two couldn't hear and didn't have time to care about this. Although still a little nervous, Lin Han seemed quite calm, with his sword in his hand. He waited for the white doves to all take wing and fly up into the sky, for the choir to finish singing the last beautiful hymn, for the surroundings to quiet down, and for He Yun-ting to look up again. He originally worried that the other would be unhappy because of his concealment, but after seeing his expression, he dismissed the idea. Even if he wasn't good with words, he didn't seem to have to worry too much. He Yun-ting would never refuse him, just as his requests with a bit of nonsense were always met. He repeated the sentence slowly, but with a tone different from the one he used to perform the ritual earlier, and replaced it with a softness that was imperceptible and capricious with a touch of pampering. Okay. A moment later, the weight in his hand lightened. The man in front of him took the sword with both hands in the most reverent gesture, lifting it above his head without taking his eyes off Lin Han for a moment. The ever-silent major stared at him. He stood up with his sword in his hand and began to speak, word for word. His oath. At the end of all the vows, the major's voice became more and more gentle. And after saying the phrase, vow to love until death, he whispered in a voice that only Lin Han could hear, Your Highness. I'm honored. After the identity of the prince was made public, many things seemed to have changed, but it seemed that they had not. His classmates wouldn't think otherwise of him because of this status, and at most they would just make a joke or two in good faith, and Lin Han would just smile and not care. The people of the empire were proud to have such a prince, and were even happier that he had chosen the best soldier to be his knight. But Lin Han himself had some doubts in recent days. He Yun-ting had new training at the end of that day, and Lin Han naturally didn't deliberately ask him to stay. He did what he said he would do, and began to find his fellow group members, then contacted his teacher, and instantly began his research on the new mecha. He originally thought about telling his knight that he had a secret he didn't know, but several times the words came to his lips and he swallowed them. The other side had a new identity to appear beside him, and he unexpectedly had more than a little timidity after he had clarified his mind. Lin Han understood that he was definitely different from He Yun-ting, whether it was the summertime soda, the hand that was handed to him, or those unconfident inner thoughts under the cold exterior that were telling him all this. He considered whether to simply ask the other man and then reach out to listen to his heart a split second before he opened his mouth. It gave him a cheating-like feeling. The talented young man who never changed his face in the face of difficult questions finally showed a confused look. It just so happened that He Yun-ting couldn't come over these days, and Lin Han pushed open the door to his mother's room on the weekend. The emperor was ready to give himself a vacation. Recently it happened to be the least eventful day of the year, after all. His son had hidden for so many years finally openly, not to mention the change of surname in advance, although the big and small things weren't handled by him. Wen Zhao inexplicably also has a kind of illusion of finally being liberated. He shouted that he was tired and exhausted, while he began to secretly plan where to sneak off to have some fun. When Lin Han walked in, he saw the emperor leaning back on the sofa, contrary to his image. His fingers lazily pointing on the light screen. This star doesn't work. The finger slid to a certain place. Wen Zhao frowned in disgust. It looks boring, not this one. The woman next to him looked at him. Why are you so cheap? I heard they have a beautiful Star River waterfall over there. I heard someone say that the son of their prime minister said I haven't announced the prince, because he was born an ugly monster and we were too embarrassed to show him. The noble queen put down her comb. Then let's not go. It's not the only place that looks good, change it and you can see it again. What about Sal Star? Wen Zhaogei asked as he slid to a new interface. Without waiting for an answer, he added, forget this one too. 2 days ago that network voting said the vote for the prince of the countries of the face of the gods, Sal Star. Actually many people voted for the Federation, because the relationship between them and the Federation is more intimate. Voting to see this, not fair. Blacklisted. And not going, the woman came over and glanced at the other side of the light screen, and then this will tell you those sub-stars to pull some votes, Han Han can't drop from first. Wen Zhaogei heard this fervently nodded. Lin Han looked at the two people with a serious grudge against these small things with mixed feelings. When the woman saw him come in, she stood up from the sofa and walked towards the baking room. Han Han is back. I suddenly remembered that I still have some things to finish. I went back to take a look. You choose first. As soon as Wen Zhaogei saw she went over there, he automatically recalled the fear dominated by her dessert, and he was alarmed. Pulling his legs and running. Before leaving he also incidentally gripped a handful of Lin Han's soft hair. Son. Don't be afraid, that vote I will not let you fall. When the other side came out, the noble and unbeatable Emperor's majesty had fallen away. She looked at the brown macarons in her hand that had clearly improved in appearance, winked and smiled. And put the plate aside. It's just to scare him. It's not that hard to eat. It's not that bad. It's that the ratio never seems to be right. Lin Han whispered in his heart in defense of his father. He knew that Wen Zhao was just a token disappearance and would be back later. He also knew that his mother wasn't angry at all and was just teasing him. The other really didn't let him eat the dessert he made, smiling and opening the light screen that Wen Zhao had just browsed halfway, continuing to look at it. Is it true that Han Han isn't coming with us? After 10 minutes, his mother probably screened out a few places and asked him. She knew that Lin Han had recently been in the research group in addition to school, sometimes not always able to return on weekends. From drawings to materials and parts, everything was carefully checked and no detail was spared. He shook his head. No. I'm not going. I have an appointment with my teacher. Wen Zhao intended to use his own private mecha to take his wife on a secret vacation for a week, and Lin Han naturally knew better and decided not to bother them, so he might as well stay here. Okay. His mother didn't insist any further, just don't tire yourself out too much. Mom. Lin Han hesitated for a moment and said hesitantly, He didn't seem to know how to speak. He wanted to ask her how she got together with his father back then, whether using mind reading was considered cheating, whether it would be tortuous to establish the relationship, or whether it would be easy and natural. But he also felt that He Yunting's character and Wen Zhao are completely two extremes, so asking out this answer may not be suitable for him. Lin Han frowned. He couldn't find anyone else to talk about this matter, and finally simply gave himself up and shoved his hand into the woman's hand, so she could listen to it herself. It's normal to fall for your own knight, right? He murmured. But I don't know what to do. Lin Han felt the warmth of the woman's palm, which gradually quieted down. Not long after, he felt a hand patting him very gently. Your father was a coward then, too, the woman said with bent eyes, and I waited for him for 3 months until he deliberately lost to me. Of course. I know the two of you aren't the same, but Han Han doesn't need to be afraid. Don't you want to know if your knight likes you too? Besides, she winked wryly and smiled, I cheated too. So it doesn't count for anything. Lin Han froze and looked up at her. Mind reading isn't something we begged for ourselves, and Han Han doesn't always want to listen to each other's minds, right? Although it sounded like that, but. So we didn't cheat. Lin Han heard a voice in his ear, and he knew his mom was reassuring him, and he also knew she was using another logic to get him off his back. Go ahead and ask whatever you want, and if you really don't want to hear your heart, it's okay to wear gloves. Just don't have any regrets. The last sentence was heard by his father and he guessed it, and he spoke carelessly, it's okay, Han Han is already an adult, if he really likes him then. Unfortunately, before he could finish his sentence, he was gagged by a macaroon with an excessive sugar distribution ratio, and was unable to say anything else. The queen smiled as she watched him swallow what she had made with a stiff expression, wiped her fingers and said, Let the prince make his own decision, you dim-witted ruler. The next day, the two of them drove a mecha, after declaring their routine recuperation, and quietly went to a certain asteroid. He didn't know if it was a coincidence. But even though the emperor himself swore to God that he had absolutely no opinion on the base's training, the training that had been going on day and night was temporarily slowed down for a few days, saying that it was to prepare for the next practical training and give the soldiers room to recuperate. So Lin Han finally met his knight again in the evening of this day. It hadn't been more than a few days since his coronation, but Lin Han still felt that He Yun-ting looked subtly different. He seemed to be more mature. And even the lines of his body were a bit more severe than in the past. He was already cold in nature. And now with this identity, from the time he stood at the entrance of the building, although there were countless eyes on him, no one dared to approach. Lin Han was glad that he had the ability to read minds every time this happened. Everyone else thought he was cold and heartless, but only he knew his secret. Only I know you are not like that. Thinking about this, his mood gradually brightened and he began to understand what his mother said. If he really didn't want to know the answer, he would definitely put his gloves on, instead of being happy at the first sight of the other person, as he was now. Will you take me back? Lin Han asked him as the two walked to the mooring point of the flying machine and stopped. He Yun-ting gave a MN. He opened the door of the craft for Lin Han and made sure he was seated before taking 2 steps to the pilot's seat and starting the engine of the craft, with the destination set at the palace where the last ceremony was held. When the aircraft rose smoothly, the two stopped talking. He Yun-ting was silent as always, while Lin Han was thinking about something else. He thought that his mother was right, mind reading wasn't considered cheating. It was just a shortcut to confirm thoughts. He was still thinking about how to open his mouth. Whether to take advantage of the quiet atmosphere now and ask, will you like me, or just say, I like you, do you want to consider me? As a result, Lin Han hadn't thought about it yet, but suddenly a feeling came up in his body that he had never felt before. His fingertips began to soften. And a little caramel sweetness escaped from his glands, and he realized that he should be in heat. Lin Han naturally didn't dare to be lax. He had a suppressant with him, side by side with the nutrients, and checked it every day, just in case. His face began to redden. All those thoughts were disrupted for a while, and for the first time he didn't know what to do. And in the silence, the major, who had been silent all the way, suddenly opened his mouth. He Yun-ting's expression didn't change much. But Lin Han just knew that he must have been building up in his mind for a long time with this current look. As if he hadn't noticed Lin Han's difference. He hung his head slightly and said, I voted for you. Lin Han was confused for a second before he realized what the other was talking about. It was the Star Prince Divine Face vote that he didn't even know started. You're still first place, He Yun-ting said seriously. A second later, Lin Han saw his nose twitching, as if he had finally smelled something unusual. Probably in heat. He suddenly had a little desire to tease him. Being close to an alpha in this situation would make him feel comfortable instinctively. Lin Han moved over a little and touched He Yun-ting's arm with his finger. So if I get pushed out of first place by the Federation, will you campaign for me? He Yun-ting's voice stiffened, but the words came out without hesitation, yes. He heard the voice of the other's mind. Tilda and ID can only cast 1 vote a day. I only have 1 communicator now, it's too little. Tilda, I'll ask Lu Anhei and the others to vote together. Tilda, would it be an abuse of power to tell the sergeants to vote? Lin Han just listened as He Yun-ting began to seriously and critically analyze the issue. I don't think so. Voting for the prince is an obligation, not my encouragement. Then we'll talk about it tomorrow. So fragrant. This is what? Is it the smell of his body? Lin Han listened in silence to the words in the other person's mind and suddenly felt that all his previous tangents were unnecessary. He decided to skip the part of asking whether he liked him or not. That would be too much of a waste of time. Lin Han's heart was beating hard, but he still had the guts to speak up. He Yun-ting, he said. Can you smell something different and still don't know what it means? Bite me, give me a hug or kiss me. Which do you choose? Chapter 124. After Lin Han said this, he held his breath and looked at the person in front of him. The never-before-seen heat was still slowly rising, and he felt that his face should be a little red now, and if he rubbed it gently with the back of his hand, he may be surprised by the burning heat. His face was hot, and he wanted to be covered with his hand. Lin Han's mind was flooded with such thoughts. It would be better to wrap his arms around him again, a little harder. So this is what it feels like to be in heat. It was a little hard. But when the other person standing in front of him was the one he liked, he couldn't help but look forward to it. Have you chosen? He raised his head slightly to look at the other side, and asked very slowly and gently. If you can't choose, then I'll acquiesce to all of the... He wanted to say that he would acquiesce to all of his choices, but before he could finish his sentence, He Yunting pulled him into his arms and hugged him. He felt a lightness on his body. The other party didn't just put one arm around him as he thought, but simply carried him with both hands out of the seat, over the narrow gap between them, precious and gentle, like a fragile object, holding Lin Han face to face in his arms, and let him sit on his lap. Rather than a hug, it was more like an answer and a guardianship that He Yunting gave with all his courage. His movements were very light, and he didn't dare to push too hard after bringing Lin Han up, but only loosely held his back with his hands to make him sit more steadily. The two were so close that even though Lin Han had temporarily withdrawn his hand and didn't hear He Yunting's thoughts, he could sense his emotions more vividly than ever. He Yunting was tensing up and testing carefully. Because he was sitting on the other's legs, this position made Lin Han half a head taller than He Yunting. He slightly dropped his eyes and looked down at him. He wanted to reach out and use his fingertips to outline the young major's high nose and cold, thin mouth from the root of the mountain. Preferably with his index finger, which could gently press his lower lip, then slide slowly down his jaw, and finally stop at the knot of his throat. He didn't have time to think about why he was having these bold thoughts. Lin Han only had time to wonder if the fact that he was now being held was proof that he wasn't overthinking things. Now if he put his hand on it, he could hear all the voices in He Yunting's mind. In fact, the answer was already obvious, but Lin Han hesitated to extend his hand. He didn't want to. He wanted to hear it for himself. Lin Han felt his limbs getting softer and softer, and his desire to be soothed was becoming more and more vivid. It felt good to be held. And he just wanted to nestle here now, not wanting to go anywhere. Your Highness. Prince. He heard He Yunting call him, in the most reverent tone of voice. As if sensing Lin Han's thoughts. He Yunting knew that Lin Han was now acquiescing to many things he was doing, yet still wanted to confess everything before it all happened. It was obvious that it was also the first time he was so frankly honest, and Lin Han could fully feel the apprehension of the man who had never been good with words at the moment. But this apprehension lasted only a short time before He Yunting looked up at him from his current position. Lin Han saw himself reflected in He Yunting's eyes. His face was flushed. His breathing was confused, but his eyes were unexpectedly serious. I like you. Lin Han heard him say. I've been confused before. He Yunting still looked at him, but now I understand. I like you. It was rare for him, who was always reticent, to say so much compared to his active heart. Lin Han was stunned and waited motionlessly for him to continue to finish. He Yunting didn't know that Lin Han could hear what was in his mind and continued to speak honestly. I couldn't stop looking at you since you first appeared at the freshman ceremony. So, Your Highness, He Yunting said, probably because he had finally opened his mouth, he called the title again and repeated, I like you. Or rather I fell in love with you at first sight. It took a long time for Lin Han to come back to his senses. He was still sitting on He Yunting's lap, with one hand resting on him, and his focused eyes hadn't moved away yet. After hearing the desired answer, Lin Han finally took out his index finger and stroked the line of He Yunting's nose as he had envisioned in his mind just now, and then followed it down to lightly press his lower lip with his fingertips. He heard the same line of his mind as earlier. Tilde I like you, tilde. The flight approached its destination and began its slow descent, the weightlessness of crossing the clouds coming through the porthole. Lin Han wasn't sitting in his seat, and didn't sit firmly in the bumps of the airflow, plus now his body was all on He Yunting, his waist was soft. And he subconsciously hugged his neck and buried himself. Lin Han naturally couldn't fall flat in the aircraft, he was steadily re-hugged. The tip of his nose swept over He Yunting's glands and smelled a wisp of ebony aroma. It was clearly Alpha's pheromone. But Lin Han felt no sense of aggression or oppression, as if he had long been quietly embedded in his blood, and this pheromone only soothed him. So warm. Lin Han thought. He buried himself in the nape of the other man's neck and whispered in response, "Me too, Senior." As He Yunting carried Lin Han through the long corridor, the guards on duty at the entrance and the occasional maid who passed by dared to pretend to glance at them without thinking, then quickly turned their heads away. At most, they sighed in their hearts that His Royal Highness was so powerful, so close to his knight. Or that Major he had this side, and seemed to really like each other. But Lin Han couldn't care less about that. He was carefully wrapped by He Yunting with a military jacket, especially tightly at the glands. The other couldn't even carry him, for fear that pheromone would leak out for others to smell, and finally held him horizontally and rushed to his room. In fact, Lin Han, although he was uncomfortable, had no problem with walking, but when he was picked up, the impulse to be capricious resurfaced, so he softly buried in his arms blinking, his arms hooked around his neck, showing a smile of triumph. When He Yunting opened the heavy door and closed it again, the two of them returned to peace and quiet. Lin Han heard He Yunting's slightly mute voice, "Here we are. MN." So he lifted his head from the other man's arms and answered, but had no intention of getting down. He was comfortably held by He Yunting, and the ebony pheromone neutralized some of the heat from the rut, rubbing against him and not wanting to come down. Even though this was only spaced out, and Omega's first rut wasn't so easy to get over. He Yunting, his voice buzzed out, like it had when the other man had him on his back. "I'm not feeling well." Lin Han looked up at him, "What should I do?" I, the silent major rarely panicked and said, "Then I'll carry you to the bed to rest." In stark contrast to this was his heart. He smells so good. It's a little hard for me to hold back. But if I bite him, he will cry, right? If I smell so good, don't you want to eat me? Lin Han murmured in a very small voice, his lips moved so lightly that the bite of the words became extremely faint. But even if he was bold, it was the first time he faced such a thing. Lin Han still didn't dare to repeat it, and finally just softly said, "Then hold me tighter." He Yunting didn't hear the last question, so he had to continue to carry Lin Han as he was told. Lin Han's room was very big, but He Yunting only felt that it was all filled with the sweet smell of caramel, which made him feel difficult to take every step. When he carried the other to the bed, he just said, "Okay," wanting to put Lin Han up, but the other. When he wasn't paying attention, the arm on his neck exerted force, and the major, whose mind was 1,000 pounds heavy at the moment, was dragged to the bed. He Yunting froze. The uncontrollable ebony pheromone has wrapped Lin Han's entire body, favoring him personally but not even dared to go further. Lin Han threw the military jacket that originally covered him to the side, pulled He Yunting with his other arm to keep him from leaving his side, and finally simply hugged his waist and trapped him in the bed. The capricious little prince became more and more reckless in this situation. "My mother said to let me make my own decision. Then I order you not to go now." He Yunting was held by his waist, and in response, he put his palm over his hand as well. "I'm not leaving." Then you mark me." Lin Han turned He Yunting's face to look at him. "I'm uncomfortable." He Yunting's silence didn't last long this time. Lin Han saw an undisguised longing in his blue eyes, yet something was still tugging at him, making him unwilling to move with his instincts. A moment later, he said, I'm afraid you'll be in pain." And Omega's first rut period was very important. He Yunting wasn't confident, still worried that he would cause him harm, even if he already knew. In fact, Lin Han also leaned on him. The pampered prince justifiably said, "But the inhibitor has side effects, and I heard that too much of it is bad for your health." Lin Han was afraid that he was going to reject him, and when he spoke again, his voice was a little bit aggrieved, and in He Yunting's eyes, the corners of his mouth were going down and his eyes were watery. He also hugged He Yunting's waist. The other side only wore a shirt. The warm skin and muscle texture under the fabric seemed to be able to touch. The teenager's tone had a sappy-like softness, and was steamed with an ambiguous wetness by the rutting period, sticky and tickling the other's heart. Okay, He Yunting was no more than a youth than Lin Han, and if he were older, he might have had other concerns to calm him down, but now that the person who made his heart beat faster was right in front of him, with an enticing sweet scent, his alpha's instincts finally broke down after hearing that plea. The next moment, Lin Han was caught by his hand and turned over, pressed into the pillow. When his alpha's sharp teeth brushed against his gland, goosebumps rose up all over Lin Han's body. His subconscious mind seemed to be divided into two halves, one wanting to protectively run away, while the other wanting to follow the aroma of ebony and cater to the other, and even buried his head a little deeper to facilitate the exposure of his gland. Ah! The sudden sensation made Lin Han's limbs freeze the moment his gland was pierced, and the pain was accompanied by the canine teeth that went straight to the delicate and fragile soft flesh, and even though He Yun-ting had soothed him for a while with his pheromone, Lin Han still cried out in uncontrollable shock with the other's movements. It hurts. It hurts. Lin Han wanted to struggle and cry, but it was as if he was being held down by this physical marker, and he was like a desperate bird of prey, trembling and trying to flutter his wings, but ultimately drowning alive in this deep sea. But He Yun-ting was still holding him tightly, with his head buried in his neck and his big hands wrapped around his waist. The prince, who had been unable to bear a little pain, gritted his teeth and carried through the painful sensation of his skin being bitten, and just felt better to breathe a sigh of relief, but was engulfed by a more violent smell. A thick, warm, ebony scent. The pheromone from his alpha was injected into his glands. Lin Han's original pain finally slowly relieved. A few moments later, the tingling sensation covered the pain, melted into the blood, and then flowed to every inch of his body. He wanted to scream but couldn't. Wanted to breathe heavily, but it was as if all 7 orifices were caged. Lin Han had never felt such a novelty. He slowly raised his hand to support himself. The other side understood his meaning. One hand fetched the teenager's thin body halfway up from the bed, but his lips and teeth still didn't leave the back of the other's neck. At the next wave of pheromone injection, Lin Han's knees began to get weak again. Too strong stimulation made him want to fall down again. Fortunately, He Yun-ting kept holding him up. Lin Han's waist was very soft, slightly bowed back, while He Yun-ting held his chin, sharp teeth buried in his neck. His posture looked ambiguous and evocative. It's a horrible thing to be in heat, Lin Han thought. If the biting, tearing sting of his glands made him feel like a bird of prey drowning alive, after the pheromone mingling, the feeling became a more indescribable entanglement. He was still the bird at the mercy of others, but no longer wanted to struggle out of the water, wanted to willingly keep falling down and drowning in the deep sea. His consciousness met in dream and reality. And he felt He Yun-ting's lips move away from his neck only when the room was filled with the scent of the two of them. But he was still deep in that ebony-lined dream world. And it was only when his alpha tenderly reached out and touched the corner of his eye with his finger that Lin Han suddenly woke up. He Yun-ting pressed the end of his eye, then traced it through his eyelashes and dabbed a finger of watery light. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I'm not crying." Lin Han gritted his teeth and tried to hold back the physical tears, but all his limbs were weak. And he had only just raised his arms before they fell back limply. His knight almost looked a little lame. The shirt was messed up by itself, a button was chipped off at the collar, there were red marks on his arms from his own scratching earlier, and a smear of blood was still at the corner of his mouth, running down his jaw. "That's my blood." Lin Han looked at the other man's chin. And it was as if what had just happened was only now beginning to come back to him. "He carried me back. He just marked me. He is my knight, so can I say now he's my alpha?" Lin Han's mind was so confused that his whole body looked dumb, and only his eyes were still staring unblinkingly at the person in front of him. Only when He Yun-ting's face was enlarged in front of his eyes did Lin Han realize that he had somehow silently approached and ghosted a kiss. He really dared to choose all of them. Lin Han's lips rubbed a little bit of blood, and thought frostily in between being kissed. Not bad for my knight. Chapter 125. He Yun-ting's kiss was much more gentle and pure than the fierce and strong mark. He didn't think about it in a complicated way, he just felt that he should do it now in this scene, and Lin Han would allow him to do it, so he went up to him. He Yun-ting didn't make any deeper movements, just touched him gently for a while and then moved away. The kiss was purely emotional, not constraining. As if it was just soothing after marking. When He Yun-ting left Lin Han's lips, slightly withdrawn a little, Lin Han gradually came back to his senses. He saw the blood on He Yun-ting's mouth fade a bit, subconsciously licked his lips, and stained away the little bit of blood that had He Yun-ting's smell. So when He Yun-ting looked at him again, he found His Highness propped up on his hands and knees on the bed, his elbows and knees were a little red, his lips and eyes were wet. And his body still smelled like pheromone after being marked by him. The soft bed sank deeper than it should have, and it looked messy. But no one wanted to clean it up properly. Hyun-ting got up and went to the bathroom to get a towel, wrung it out with warm water and went to Lin Han to wipe his gland that he had bitten. The blood on it had dried up and the towel was the right temperature, so Lin Han just physically shuddered and obediently let Hyun-ting wipe him clean. "Doesn't that hurt?" He saw the teeth marks on the gland and asked with some heartache. The first bite was almost too much to bear, Lin Han said quietly in his heart. But when Hyun-ting's fingers rubbed the back of his neck with great care and Lin Han heard his heartfelt voice of pain, he didn't want to tell the truth. "It's okay. It doesn't hurt much." He felt the other man's fingertips run over the glands, and the trembling sensation seemed to be superimposed, cumulative and progressive. With the scent and temperature that belonged exclusively to Hyun-ting, probably because of his Omega's nature, he was soothed and comfortable, and even wanted a little more, and simply spoke bluntly, "Touch me more." He slumped on the bed with increasing enjoyment, squinting his eyes with insatiable satisfaction. It was summer. The room was air-conditioned. And this simple coexistence made Lin Han so comfortable that he was about to fall asleep. Although Lin Han was a noble person, his parents had a good character and education. So he hadn't developed an arrogant character of putting his hands on his clothes and eating his food, and he didn't rely on others too much in life. He felt that his face was a bit itchy and just wanted to move it by himself. In the past he would have taken it and wiped it himself, but now the person in front of him was Hyun-ting. Lin Han not only did not struggle, but even tilted his head and said, "I want to wipe my face too." Hyun-ting, obediently did as he was told. As he wiped, Lin Han looked at him and smiled. This made Hyun-ting a little confused. He didn't know why Lin Han was so happy, but the smile was contagious, and without him noticing it, the corners of his lips, which had been taut, had a slight curve. Hyun-ting didn't notice it himself, but it didn't escape Lin Han's eyes. He was surprised to catch this little smile and peeked out of the towel, calling his name. Hyun-ting. The major looked at him a little confused. Before he could make a sound, the young prince suddenly straightened his back and crawled forward twice with his hands propped up on the bed as a point of strength, and his wet lips came up once more and kissed himself fiercely. Mua. This kiss was a bit heavy, and even made a crisp sound. Hyun-ting's entire movement froze. Yet that wasn't all. Although he was still in the aftermath of being marked, and his limbs hadn't recovered, perhaps it was his kiss that gave him courage, and the teenager, who was always obedient and docile, decided to do something wrong to his knight. And pressed himself back up during the time when Hyun-ting was at a standstill because he was overwhelmed. He reached out and boldly rubbed Hyun-ting's hair. Then cupped his face and gave him another kiss on each cheek. The hot feeling faded away and was replaced by a new everything. The joy of being a teenager was too pure and too simple. He had only just turned 18, and the trials and tribulations ahead were too late to deal with, and malice and darkness couldn't come near him. He was running carefree in the sunshine, his parents were harmonious and warm, he could study Mecha if he wanted to, he could confess his love to whomever he wanted, and his alpha held a clear heart and loved him without reservation. There couldn't be a better time than now. After Lin Han kissed him, he jumped into his arms and hugged him, calling him by his name and saying, "I like you," out loud. He remembered being interested in mecha since he was very young. For this reason, Wen Zhaoge made a model of a mecha that was equal to his height at the time, and he was so happy that he hugged it all day for a long time. He seriously told his mother that he wanted to drive a mecha in the future, and he slept with the model in his arms, saying that he needed to get familiar with it now. Later, as he grew taller, the mecha became an obsolete toy and was placed on his bedside. But no matter how long it took, the mecha remained his most beloved toy. Lin Han hugged Hyun-ting like his beloved mecha model. No. He was much more beloved than that toy. His mom and dad were away, he and Hyun-ting were alone, and he was an adult now. He hugged Hyun-ting. His eyes were bright with the unadulterated enthusiasm and love of a teenager, and said, "I like you." Maybe there was still a childishness in the action, maybe there was no image of the two of them in each other's eyes now, maybe they would feel some shame after a few years, but at least they both carry absolute sincerity and honesty. Even if Hyun-ting was dull, he could feel that the teenager in front of him was happy, really happy. So he was also melted by this burst of warmth. he was also just a young man just emerging, not so much forward-looking thoughts. He allowed his hair to be ruffled by the teenager, and both of them rolled into a ball on the bed in a mess, and he would kiss Lin Han from his eyes to his lips, and then cuddle with him in a precious place, listening to his unsteady heartbeat. He also liked him. Especially. So much so that he began to blame himself for being so inarticulate. He should have gone to him on the first day he met him, recognized his own feelings, and gave him a smile. Thinking about it, He Yunting didn't know yet that his mind would be heard by the other party, and only wanted to embrace him harder at this second. What will it be like in the future? No one knows. He Yunting thought to himself as he remembered the fleeting Arinarong Nebula, but they both have the present. He Yunting, Lin Han spoke as she nestled in his arms and grabbed his open collar, you shouldn't have self-doubt. Anyway. Even if you didn't come to me at that time, I would definitely notice you later. Although my mother said that it doesn't count as cheating, I thought I should tell you anyway. Lin Han no longer had the previous doubt and lack of confidence in his voice, I can. In fact. Hear what's going on in your mind. Like right now, he caught He Yunting's hand and clasped all 5 of his fingers, you're saying in your mind that you want to be with the prince all the time. The young prince tilted his head, I feel the same. After a long time. When the clouds outside the window were tinged with twilight, He Yunting heard a polite knock at the door. He Yunting got out of bed gingerly, only tidying up his messed up hair, and walked to the door to open it. The person who knocked on the door was the chief steward who was in charge of the prince's daily routine. When he saw that the person who opened the door was not Lin Han, he obviously froze for a moment. Saw the collar of He Yunting's shirt that he hadn't been able to smooth out, and after a moment of dumbness, he quickly understood what was going on. His Royal Highness is still sleeping. He Yunting spoke. The other party nodded. He had only come to ask about dinner. Saw the picture in front of him and quickly made up a whole set of indescribable scenes on his own, said very understandingly, then I'll bring him over later, then thoughtfully didn't look at He Yunting's expression, and quickly closed the door. The moment the door closed, he felt he was really a genius at reading people's minds. But after the door was closed, he started to launch into a daze. Did he let someone misunderstand something? It didn't matter if he misunderstood him, he was afraid that others might think otherwise of Lin Han. He Yunting walked over to the mirror and realized how reverie-inducing he looked now. The button on the collar of his shirt had fallen off, his whole shirt was wrinkled, and there was a little red mark on his chin, probably from when Lin Han had rubbed himself to sleep earlier. But the thing was the two of them just cuddled and slept for a while. He walked back to the bed. The teenager was sleeping with his eyes closed, his eyelashes swept down meekly, his breathing even and long. His skin was so white and soft that it was almost transparent, with a large patch of skin showing at his neck, lined with glandular denticles, looking in a particularly alluring and innocent way. He was still in the same position as earlier. As if he was still waiting for his alpha to come over and embrace him and enter into an endless sweet dream together. So He Yunting went over and re-hugged him. Lin Han wasn't defensive towards him at all. He Yunting lost his sleepiness, looking down at the person in his arms. The teenager's breath was sprayed on the nape of his neck, he seemed to be a little hot, a little bead of sweat oozing from his forehead, sleeping well and turning over in his arms in small increments. His hands were on his waist. And if his head was a little lower, he could grab the other's open and closed lips. Lin Han's waist was soft, and so were his lips. He used a little bit of force, and his tender waist showed the red pinch, while gently sucking. He could also taste the sweet fragrance of his soft lips. Just now neither of them thought much about it, until this time. Another alpha instinct rose up from the bottom of He Yunting's heart. This was his omega. He would speak in a warm voice and pamper him, would pester him. Confess loudly, and kiss him without shame. But a voice was saying, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to just hug and press lips together. He Yunting felt his fingertips get a little hot, as if they were a little hotter than Lin Han's breath at the moment. He understood that this was an alpha's instinct, a part of himself that he couldn't escape. But Lin Han was so good and so naive, his world was clean and beautiful, as if it was a stain on him to have this thought. He Yunting tried to control himself from thinking about this issue, but the more he avoided it, the more inescapable it became. His body's reaction wasn't under his control, and by the time he reacted, something embarrassing had already happened. The point was, Lin Han was still sleeping on his pillow. He Yunting was afraid to wake him up and dared not move, then only desperate to feel the situation more and more intense he was a little dry-mouthed. It was at this moment that Lin Han's eyelashes moved. He Yunting was terrified. He just wanted to hold Lin Han farther away when he saw the person in his arms open his eyes. 1 second. 2 seconds. There was a rare silence in the air. Lin Han hadn't yet reacted to the current situation, and was still recalling the confession and beautiful dream he had just had, when he suddenly felt something was wrong. He smelled the smell of ebony pheromone, and Lin Han suddenly bounced off of He Yunting and quickly understood in that second. The Major, who was always calm and self-possessed, also froze in place for a long time, and only moved awkwardly and stiffly when he saw the teenager in front of him, before covering himself in the blanket. You. Both opened their mouths at the same time. Wait for me. He Yunting began to jerk himself to his feet with the speed of the army, walking towards the bathroom as he said, "Be out soon." Oh. Lin Han also waited until he heard the bathroom door close before quietly peeking a head out from under the covers, his entire face alarmingly red. The prince was an adult. The prince was psyching himself up. What was so embarrassing about this? He said darkly, touching his burning cheeks. Unfortunately, when the sound of the water in the bathroom ended, Lin Han's face didn't return to the color it had just been. When he heard the bathroom door slam, Lin Han didn't have time to think about it, but he first pulled himself back under the covers and puffed up a bag on the bed. No. He was running away from something. He shouldn't be running away from it. He felt a cool vapor approaching him. And Lin Han had just done enough to get out from under the covers when he felt someone gently pat his covers. Then he retracted like a snail. The prince said in his heart that he was useless, while asking in a low voice, "What's wrong?" He Yunting's voice resumed, low and smooth, as if he wasn't the one who came over for a kiss before, "Your Highness. Do you want to take a bath?" Lin Han's head, which was just about to come out of the blanket, froze for a moment. He Yunting. How are you calm so quickly? Lin Han buried the blanket on his body, wrapped his whole body into a ball on the bed, and said loudly through the not-so-heavy fabric, "No. I'm not going to wash." Oh. He heard He Yunting answer, which was obviously a normal reply, but Lin Han felt a bit aggrieved. How could his knight be aggrieved? He let out a breath and finally decided not to be an ostrich. The prince finally got out of the blanket. His face was red as hell, but his eyes were so calm that he said, "Forget it." He Yunting lifted his head to look at him. Lin Han's eyes wandered from side to side, but finally gave himself up and reached out to the person in front of him. "Hold me. Let's be capricious," he thought. "If you give me a hug, I'll know what you're thinking." His neck even turned red. "Are you going to hug me?" He Yunting finally reacted. The previous embarrassment was nothing. He took him back into his arms. The young man was very thin, easy to hold up. The youth who was always indifferent listened to the heartbeat of the person in his arms and finally smiled very gently at this moment. He stroked a handful of Lin Han's hair, felt him twisted and straightforward like, kissed the top of his head. "Good boy." The prince's divine face, vote, which had been in full swing, was reaching a fever pitch. In the school forum of the Imperial Military University, a constant stream of messages and pop-ups kept scrolling. "If you don't vote, I won't vote. When will Kobayashi make his mark? Long live the Empire. Long live the prince. Why are they still swiping votes in the Federation? I want to report it. Is this event really fair? Fuck. Why? Shaolin isn't far ahead. How come the two votes are now equal? Everyone vote up. You can vote once a day. Don't let go of the opportunity to vote every day. I won't allow my Han. No. Not Han. But His Royal Highness to fall out of first place." There were also whispers of doubt. Speaking of which, what exactly is the use of this vote? It seems like even if you win, you won't be able to collect the prize. But generally such queries were just sent out, and were brushed over by more people. It's not a matter of usefulness. Stop it. Hit the pitching team quickly out. I have to see our prince on the front page of the site. Interstellar platoon. Plug the dignity of the Empire. The prince's dignity. How can we lose to the Federation? For the glory of the Empire. Long live the Empire. Everyday people routinely asked, have you voted today? And, vote for His Highness. Although His Highness himself didn't care much about the result, he was still motivated by this enthusiastic atmosphere. Lin Han originally wanted to report to his parents about his relationship with He Yunting, but to his surprise, Wen Zhao came back without asking anything, and his first question was, "Is my son still number one now?" His mother smiled and flipped through the data. Nodding her head, Wen Zhao was satisfied. Then there's no need to call the base people to participate. Lin Han was a bit confused and asked his mother in a small voice, "Mom, didn't you guys tell me to make my own decision last time?" He had already made a decision and wanted to tell them. Didn't Han already have the result? The Empress looked at him with understanding and smiled. "I can already see it in your eyes." Lin Han froze and blinked, hearing his mother say to him, Han will always be as happy and joyful as he is now too." Since their confession that day, the two had eliminated their awkwardness before, but they hadn't made any further moves for the time being. He Yunting was still busy getting back into his new training, and Lin Han was still soaking in his research group as usual. The only difference was that everyone knew about their relationship, and everyone offered their best wishes. Lin Han had been having a dream lately. It was 10 years later, when he joined the Mecha Research Institute and became one of the best mecha designers there. He designed a two-person mecha for his lover. He Yunting was already the youngest general of the empire, the sharpest sword, the indestructible hero in everyone's heart. They were still together. Mother's desserts were still not very good, but father would complain symbolically for a few moments before eating them one by one. Everything was wonderful. No different from now. He also went to the border area with He Yunting, passing through the oddbound system, and accidentally picked up a dark, hairy blob. He Yunting said the little one was called Gur and asked him if he wanted to take it back. He dreamed of many things. When he woke up, he couldn't remember many details. Lin Han rubbed his eyes. Today was the day he came to the base, because He Yunting couldn't come over to keep him company, and his mecha research had a new trend, so he was asked to do tests. The people at the base saluted him self-consciously when they saw him and told him where major he was. Lin Han nodded and walked toward He Yunting at the training ground. When Lin Han entered, He Yunting had just finished a round of training and was resting on the sidelines. He was swiping his communicator. His expression looked serious. He didn't seem to notice anyone coming in. Lin Han gingerly walked over until the distance between them was close enough for him to reach out and cover the other man's eyes. The major smiled very softly, knowing it was him coming. "What are you doing?" Lin Han asked him. He was keenly aware of He Yunting trying to take the communicator back. But the other man quickly realized it was useless. After all, Lin Han was a mind reader. So the major handed the communicator back to Lin Han with a straight face, "Voting for you." Quote. Lin Han saw the contents of his communicator. The indifferent major's communicator wasn't the same thing. It turned out that he wasn't the only one voting for him, but also asking his subordinates to join him in canvassing for votes. Lin Han saw Lu Anhei's screaming message. "Boss, I really have asked all the people to help vote. Don't worry, His Royal Highness is definitely number one. Please let me go, please." Lin Han looked and laughed. "You want me to be number one so badly?" The corners of He Yunting's mouth straightened and he gave a very serious, "My prince is always the best. Lin Han's heart moved and he held his hand. "Actually, there's no need to vote," he said. "I'm not going to receive an award. That's not the same." Lin Han heard He Yunting's insistent heart. "My new mecha is almost ready. Do you want to try it out before it's officially delivered?" He took He Yunting's hand and shook it back and forth, smiling. "I promised you to make the newest and best mecha for you. Then take you to see the stars." He Yunting saw glittering stars in his eyes. There was an eager anticipation of the future in the teenager's eyes, and an unconcealed love for him. "Do you want an advance on the reward?" The young prince looked at him and smiled, reaching out to hook He Yunting's shoulder. "Okay." So he moved over and kissed the other man on the lips. The two hadn't seen each other for only a few days, but the passion after the confession was still there, and it was originally just a pure kiss, and not much later. Lin Han heard the rest of He Yunting's heart. "His tongue will be very sweet." Lin Han's face suddenly burned up. Two straightforward words appeared in his own ears, so he was somewhat at a loss to freeze. There was actually nothing to be ashamed of, and nothing to run away from. The two of them coincidentally thought of marking that time. They were falling in love and had a long, long way to go. So it wasn't a big deal. They wanted to taste what it was like. Lin Hong's heart was beating fast, but his mind was as calm as it had ever been. He cupped his knight's face and backed away slightly to meet him at eye level. He Yun-ting, he called his name. He had said, "I like you," so many times, but he knew he wouldn't get bored of it. So Lin Hong curled his eyes and smiled, and said in a very solemn and gentle tone, "I like you." The next second, he came back up and tentatively extended the tip of his tongue, carefully rubbing this alpha's lips, like a kitten finding its beloved milk, lapping it up in small bites. He finally tasted something else. But that was another long, long happy story. Chapter 126. Lu Anhei, present. Report your training. The person whose name was called stood outside the line, and gave a standard military salute to the instructor. All additional training has been completed. Pull-ups and push-ups all met the standard. Mecha weightlessness test level 4 passed. The instructor grunted, "What else?" The young man, who had just shed his boyishness, tried to purse the corners of his mouth. Report. No more. Instructor. Someone in the group let out a muffled laugh. As soon as there was a movement, the person who let out the muffled laugh was waved over by the instructor with an eye slash and immediately silenced. But that didn't stop them from secretly gawking at the person outside the line. It was only the second day. And everyone knew him. Every year, the Imperial Army would send a group of excellent recruits to join the military training department, with the most stringent requirements for management. Within 2 years from which the outstanding non-commissioned officers could directly enter the base service, and rank and treatment would be higher than the average soldier a lot. This was a group of fresh blood that just came in this year. In the end, these people were still students, the bones still with fearless aspirations, but also young blood, so even if the management was strict, the whole training department was also vigorous. And every year there were individual recruits who were overly energetic. Obviously, this year was the young sergeant who was being trained with his hands behind his back at the moment. The instructor paced coldly beside him. Are there really no other disciplinary infractions? He had taken too many similar students, and as long as the young man in front of him looked a little bit wrong, he could detect it. But the other party wasn't at all flawed, but very calm. Report. There's no disciplinary situation. After all, there was no evidence. The instructor ultimately couldn't do anything with him, after all. His results were very impressive, and the results of the training were indeed unmistakable. He glanced down at the miniature display showing information on his opponent's chest again. Lu Anhei, Alpha Male. Mecha Piloting and Combat Major. The instructor frowned and waved his hand. Return to your team. Yes. Everyone continue. The soldiers in the formation let out a loud slogan without a glance and rejoined the training. When the day's practice was over and the bugle blew, the men had time to catch their breath and leaned back sporadically to rest and relax and chat. Lu Anhei went to his locker and grabbed a bottle of water, drinking half of it in one gulp, when he heard a good-natured whistle and turned his head around. Awesome. Xiao Lu. The soldier who spoke gave him a thumbs up. They say this instructor is particularly scary, nothing can escape his eyes, and you actually didn't get caught by him. Lu Anhei put the bottle back and smiled, thanks to your secrecy. Don't say that. We're all brothers in the same batch, the man said quickly, no one would be so ungrateful. Thank you. Lu Anhei hooked the corners of his mouth. Wait. Next time I have the chance to bring you back. His colleague patted his shoulder and went to rest elsewhere. Everyone knew that the training department was very strict, and everyone was afraid of getting into something and being sent back, losing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Especially at the beginning. Everyone was very well behaved and didn't dare to make mistakes with fear and trepidation. The reason why Lu Anhei got acquainted with everyone in one day and no one reported him to the instructors was because he was the only one who dared to treat the place as a school dormitory on the first night of the training. Not only did he hide snacks from the world when he came, the amount wasn't small. All the new recruits got a share that night, and when he pulled out all kinds of snacks from his bag, they all showed unbelievable expressions, but he himself was very calm, and gave them to everyone one by one. These are all the gifts I smuggled here, don't be polite. He didn't take the rules seriously. Some people asked him incredulously, How did you bring them here when you had to check your belongings? Oh. This, Lu Anhe said gently, I hid it in the cover of the mecha engine. Thanks. Everyone looked at what they were holding with a complicated expression. But Lu Anhe was so good-tempered and capable, and so familiar with everyone, that the next day when the instructor found the suspicious bag in his backpack and took him out alone for additional training, no one gave him up. And the instructor finally had to return without success. Lu Anhe also gave the instructors nicknames, but he was very measured, not too much. Respectful and polite enough when facing the higher-ranking soldiers, he seemed to have an innate sense of affection, despite the occasional mischief, but in reality was very reliable. When they first joined the training department, they would have a half-month training program, where they would eat and sleep together, in order to integrate more quickly. And only after the half-month was over would they start to arrange for a dormitory. During this period Lu Anhe lived up to the expectations of being the most conspicuous person in this group of recruits. Sometimes even the instructors couldn't do anything with him, knowing that this person must have some small action, and guessed that the packing bag before had to do something with him. Unfortunately, this group of soldiers were now very united, no one betrayed him. The instructor also probably knew that the other was estimated to commit some harmless non-principal issues, and finally looked at his military strength on the part of the choice to bypass. This half-month training was not too big. The main purpose was to make the new recruits into the camp aware of their identity. The project was also more than the regular several. In addition to physical fitness test and mecha practice, there were various kinds of practice. One of them was to go to the Empire's special prison. Special prisons were divided into cells according to the first and second gender and the type of crime, from theft, cheating, assault, and so on down the categories. Different penalties for different layers, to the last some of the sensational prison, has gone down many layers. After all, then again are students, they wouldn't now personally contact these, but the various images still made the soldiers on the way back with a heavy heart. The instructor said on the return flight, you certainly wouldn't be able to go all the way straight in the future, sin and blood are also unavoidable to stain your hands. See those horrible, despicable alpha, your enemy may be Zerg, perhaps your own kind. If you can't take it, you have one more chance to go back. If you don't go now, when the training is over, what awaits you is even more rigorous training. There were some heavier words after that, but even so, at the end of the day, none of them chose to go back. Everyone was silent when they rejoined the training section, until it was time for bed. The recruits gradually came around, but the conversation still revolved around the special prison. Everyone still had the impression that the lower the level, the more heavily guarded it became, and by the time they reached the last few levels of the lift, a disturbing smell permeated the entire area. It was pheromone after the glands had been treated. Do you guys remember what those prisoners were wearing on their faces on the lower 3 levels? One of the recruits named Yi Ling eased over and said, I didn't feel comfortable staying there for one more minute. Who isn't? Yes, yes, yes. It's really so uncomfortable that sometimes one feels ashamed of such kind. The vast majority of soldiers selected to come over were alpha, and would be physically repulsed when encountering similar pheromone, especially with aggressive pheromone, which irritates the alpha mind. The criminal of that layer heard a lot of Omega a few years ago, a crime of the most vicious alpha. By the time he was apprehended back, he couldn't control his own pheromone or their canine teeth. The pheromone in the Omega's body was very disturbed after several different forced markings. If forcibly removed, his life would be threatened. And the punishment for this alpha was much more than simple euthanasia, so he was finally treated with special means to treat the gland and put in the special prison he was in. At the time the group of recruits saw the convict, he was staring at them with a grim look on his face, letting out a hoarse and desperate hiss. Stop the biter. Lu Anhe heard Yi Ling's words, recalled the construction of that thing, and frowned. Ah. Right. Yi Ling didn't expect Lu Anhe to remember the name and nodded, I heard of it a long time ago. But I didn't expect to see it in real life for the first time in this situation. After all, almost no one would use it now, right? Another man interjected. The bite stopper, as the name suggests, is a tool designed specifically for alpha, to prevent them from hurting Omega due to pheromone or something else acting up. The stop bite device was made into a mesh, half of the alpha's face was confined. And then the leather straps on either side were fastened behind the head over the ears. leaving only the hollow cold metal diamond grid for breathing and communication. This thing was prevalent in the most chaotic parts of the civilian areas a long time ago, then gradually outlawed because of the importance of the second gender, especially the alpha of the core. The bite stopper is simply an insult to them, a contempt for their self-discipline, as if wearing a bite stopper was like an animal on a leash, a sign of immaturity. Despicable and incompetent. And so it is. The crowd nodded. After all, the kind of alpha that wears it is the kind that doesn't even have sanity anymore. Do you think that kind of alpha will bite whoever he sees if he removes the bite stopper? One of the recruits suddenly said. Someone waved his hand and said, "That's not likely. I've seen Pheromone in action and I just want to fight them." Yeah. You can't bite an alpha, you can't mark him, and you can't repel each other, even if the alpha is crazy. Everyone chatted. The previous silent atmosphere eased a lot. The training only lasted a few days away, these young soldiers would soon face more rigorous training, the current gossip was only to relax their minds after a while. Not necessarily. Lu Anhe walked to the door and was just going to wash up when he heard a somewhat unfamiliar voice. Species diversity. The person who spoke smiled. His tone didn't refute others, jokingly whispered his opinion, in case the alpha goes crazy and bites even his own kind. His voice wasn't aggressive. And his looks matched his voice, and when he smiled, he revealed a tiger tooth, with a natural sense of youth. Lu Anhe stared at him for a while before recalling this person's name from his mind, which seemed to be Ji Meng. Chapter 127. Yes, Lu Anhe casually answered as he held a hand on the door frame, noticing the other party because he spoke and showed a smile. It was like he was thanking him for his response. Lu Anhe froze, nodded at him, and only then walked out the door. Yi Ling's personality was more cheerful, so Lu Anhe had a few words with him before. The two of them chatted when Yi Ling said that Ji Meng and him were professionals, and he was not as friendly and familiar as Lu Anhe, but he wasn't aloof. As long as someone talked to him, he would respond seriously, even if the topic may not be what he likes. He was admitted from the common area. So he was a bit introverted at first when he enrolled. Yi Ling thought about it and added, maybe also because of his name. Some people in the common area would attack someone for the most frivolous things. So he barely spoke at first, but still tried to make an effort to get along with everyone, and after noticing that the atmosphere here is obviously much better, now he occasionally joins in on some topics that interest him. So this is the topic he is interested in. Lu Anhe thought as he walked. After coming back from washing up, people came to greet him from time to time. Because the training will soon be over, no one had to sleep in a bunk together, but were free to share a double dormitory with better conditions. After all, he was the most outstanding person in the training period, and many soldiers came to him to ask him to share a dormitory with them. He himself wasn't really particular about it, he was pretty much the same as anyone else. He had a good personality anyway. Basically he wouldn't have a problem with anyone he shared a room with. But he didn't bother to dwell on this kind of thing, after all. It wasn't a big deal. So he just smiled and casually made a few jokes to cover it, and told them he didn't really care, he wasn't picky. Just come to him when they decided on a winner. Someone interjected. Then does following you allow you to eat those snacks you smuggled in, from time to time? Although not something particularly rare. Here after all. Compared to other locations, the future would certainly be more and more harsh until the end of their training, items from the outside gradually becoming rare. Lu Anhe scolded him. Do you think I'm an online supermarket? How can I get it just like that? Everyone was laughing and joking, only a new recruit named Yi Nan, who couldn't read the atmosphere, had to keep asking Lu Anhe who he finally decided to share a dorm with. Lu Anhe was a bit helpless, but still lightly covered up the past. Before turning off the lights, he subconsciously glanced at the corner of the bunk. Ji Meng had fallen asleep, quietly, not disturbing anyone. The surrounding noise seems to have nothing to do with him, he wasn't affected at all. A few lively soldiers looked like they didn't want to sleep too much, and were planning to come over to Lu Anhe for a chat, one of them having a loud voice, "Old Lu Yu tomorrow," subconsciously. Lu Anhe lowered his voice a little, as if he didn't want to disturb others. Tomorrow's business will be discussed tomorrow. I'll sleep first. Probably because of Lu Anhe's strong appeal in this group of people, hearing him say so. The other side went, "Oh," then very naturally stopped talking, "That's okay." The original buzz quieted down, and soon everyone stopped talking. The night was getting late, but Lu Anhei had a few rare moments of sleepiness. He felt that he always read people very accurately. For example, when he saw Major, he knew that the other party was certainly not as cold and heartless as he appeared, but also made up his mind to go to the base in the future. For example, Yi Ling looked like a very honest person, everything was written on the face, including the undisguised ambition and passion. And now, he thought Ji Meng was very clean, with no impurities at all, like a teenager who was full of vigor. It must be great to work with him, Lu Anhei thought. The other must be a trustworthy comrade. If he could get to know him better. Maybe the other could also be a close friend who he can talk deeply with. He was right about people. The last day of training. This day the instructor specially ended the training early and brought all the people who came in this batch to the unique underground mecha vault of the training department. I hope you understand that this is not like school. The instructor looked solemnly at the young faces in front of him with his hands behind his back. Most of the mechs in the school are training mechs. Since you were assigned here as the best, in order to bring out the best in everyone, the training department has naturally arranged for the latest and best actual mechs. As he spoke, the magnificent doors behind him slowly opened and a mech on a fully automated track caused many recruits to let out a yearning cry of amazement. It's the Q series that the institute just passed multiple tests on. Someone couldn't hide his excitement, it's not even mass-produced yet. And here it is, and that one at the back. The arsenal is the multi-track vortex acceleration cannon that I've been coveting for a long time. I've even thought of a name for the mech I've been dreaming of if I ever get to drive it. The instructor let the crowd talk for a rare minute before coughing and drawing everyone's attention back to him. As you can see, these are mechs that are completely in sync with the base and have the best performance in every aspect at the moment. The instructor spoke, "If you have enough strength to stay, it can be yours." The atmosphere became more and more enthusiastic. Of course, the number of top mechs is limited. So surely not everyone can choose the one they want. The instructor turned his words around, "What you can pilot will be up to you." Someone asked a question. Report, is it a rerun of the general ability test? The instructor glanced at him and shook his head. Then, what was the point of having you guys set training for so long? He asked rhetorically, your every move is on our radar. And your physical functions and general standards have been done a lot these days. So, we have been secretly recording and scoring these days for a long time, each person has their own corresponding score. He shook the light brain in his hand, the results are already on it. Many soldiers looked at the instructor incredulously, they knew nothing about the scoring criteria, and they didn't expect that this matter wasn't told to them in advance. Well, the instructor paused and moved on to the next topic. Tomorrow the training will be over and everyone knows that they will be divided into dormitories. I will only give you 10 minutes to group yourselves, 2 to a dormitory. Report your choices after 10 minutes. And then according to the same dormitory situation and the overall score of everyone in my hand, assign your own mechs. Future training will also mostly be in groups of 2, and since there are currently only 4 top-tier mechs that can be assigned to everyone, and the batches of mechs are different, the subsequent training content may not be the same for everyone. Someone hissed. If one had a top mech, the intensity and depth of training would definitely be different from everyone else, and as each other's roommates. 2 people would receive the same training as a unit. There would be a final test at the end of the school year, and having experienced a higher level of training would definitely give you an advantage, so what originally sounded like a simple assignment of assigning dormitories suddenly became tense. 4 top mechs. In other words, if you could live with 4 of them, no matter what, you would benefit. Not to mention that it was still unknown who the 4 people were. Don't say fair or unfair. Nothing is absolutely fair, the instructor said indifferently. The score will be announced after everyone has finished grouping themselves, and the clock will start. As soon as he finished his speech, everyone immediately got noisy. Although Lu Anhei didn't seem to be very disciplined, bringing snacks and coming up with nicknames, his strength when he came in was obvious to all. Whether it was mental strength, physical strength, or professional ability, all were excellent. Which made the instructor turn a blind eye, even if he had a lot of words to tell him. In addition, he wasn't showing off, and could talk. and had long been acquainted with everyone. A group of people are jokingly or seriously come over and talk to him. Brother Lu. Brother Lu, look at me. Old Lu. I'm capable. Take this, brother. Yi Ling's overall strength was also very strong, but he didn't care too much about this, and also joined in on the joke. Old Lu. You know I'm really obedient, choosing me or not is secondary, I just want to live closer to you. Lu Anhei slapped him on the shoulder. Okay. Don't tease me. You guys choose first, don't mind me, I'll talk later. Someone laughed, saying that this was like waiting for the final selection of concubines. Lu Anhei pointed to his nose and said, if you say one more word and you'll lose all your benefits. The other side heckled and closed his mouth. And found someone else to team up with. After all, the roommate bonus was good. But for the final test they still had to rely on themselves. 5 minutes passed. And a large part of the people had chosen. Yi Ling had a friend he wanted to take care of, so he didn't hesitate to group with him. Others also chose their own roommates, so only a few people were still thinking about what to do. Lu Anhei was in a daze when he suddenly heard someone call his name. Anhei. He turned around and looked at Yi Nan, who had asked him more than once last night, and somehow the smile on his face made Lu Anhei feel a little tired. You don't have a roommate yet. Consider me. Yi Nan squinted at him. I think brothers staying together for mutual benefit is fine. Lu Anhei recalled that Yi Nan wasn't too bad during training, but somehow there was nothing that stood out. Probably because Yi Nan kept talking to him last night to make him a little annoyed. Lu Anhei inexplicably recalled the quietly sleeping person in the corner, wondering if they had been too noisy last night. He smiled politely. No. I think you're pretty good, but we're probably not that similar. This was already a clear rejection. But Yi Nan seemed to have been born without the skill of reading the atmosphere, so he still tirelessly stuck to him. What's similar? Believe me, as long as the two of us live together, we would definitely be the best in the end. Lu Anhei raised his eyebrows. He was good-tempered. But there was no need to waste his time on this kind of boring discussion. He stood up and wanted to go elsewhere. It's still early from the end, the road is still long, how dare you boast that you must be the best? Yi Nan wanted to catch up and continue to persuade him, but as a result, he just put a hand on Lu Anhei's shoulder, which the other avoided. When Yi Nan saw him act like this, he became more anxious. He didn't understand why this person who usually had a good personality was now stubborn and donkey-like. Lu Anhei quickly walked forward, while Yi Nan shouted, "Hey," catching up anxiously, "Wait. What is there to consider?" He used a little force, trying to grab Lu Anhei's shoulder to pull him back. When Lu Anhei finally turned around with an impatient frown, "There is nothing to." As a result, he momentarily walked without looking at the road, inadvertently bumping into someone as he turned around. "I'm sorry." Before Lu Anhei could react, the person who was bumped into opened his mouth first to apologize. He didn't pay any more attention to Yi Nan, and looked at Ji Meng, who apologized somewhat embarrassed. Just now he turned around quite sharply, so the hit was probably not light. "I'm the one who should say sorry," Lu Anhei hurriedly said. He wanted to ask something else, but suddenly found Ji Meng standing alone, looking at a group of soldiers who had already formed up. The two of them were talking as if they were invisible, but Yi Nan was still very persistent in wanting Lu Anhei to agree, and didn't even look at Ji Meng, nor did he greet him, but continued to tirelessly push. "So we have a deal?" "No deal." Lu Anhei didn't turn around, just looked at the person in front of him. Ji Meng's hair color was light, the contours of his features were also very soft. He heard what Lu Anhei just said, smiled, showing one side of the tiger teeth. "It's okay." Lu Anhei looked at Ji Meng, recalling what he thought about last night, and he suddenly felt that he could also pick a good roommate. He didn't think much about it. Reached out and pulled the teenager who was ready to leave and asked bluntly, "Do you have a roommate?" Ji Meng stopped and shook his head. "Then do you want to consider living with me?" Chapter 128. Ji Meng was visibly stunned for a moment. As if he couldn't believe that a person like Lu Anhei would take the initiative to ask to be his roommate. Lu Anhei's decision wasn't on a whim. So he looked at the other carefully and asked him again, "How about it?" Ji Meng, however. While he was in a daze, Yi Nan, who was waiting nearby, began speaking incredulously. "Why did you choose him instead of me, Lao Lu?" Lu Anhe casually answered, there's no reason. I already said I didn't care. Ji Meng didn't like talking to strangers, but he could perceive the meaning in Yi Nan's tone, and looked up at him. This kind of stubborn admiration has been a common occurrence in the army for a long time. Yi Nan just glanced at Ji Meng and had no impression of him. He just felt that he didn't talk much and seemed to be no worse than him. Trust me. I'm not bad. Maybe I could get the best mecha. What's wrong with everyone making progress together? Yes. Ji Meng suddenly spoke, but instead of answering Yi Nan's question, he smiled at Lu Anhe. Do you want to make progress with me? Yi Nan was a little upset. He choked by what Ji Meng said as he impulsively exclaimed, you'll drag others down. Lu Anhe was really annoyed when he heard this sentence. He just shook Yi Nan's hand and was about to talk, but Ji Meng wasn't angry at all. Instead, he replied, oh, am I a drag? Not at all. Ji Meng seemed to be a little timid when getting along with others, but he has never taken a step back when they were insulting him. I don't think there's a chance you're better than me. This was probably the most certain thing he had said these days. Yi Nan probably thought that Ji Meng was just like him, exaggerating his abilities in order to room with Lu Anhe, so he finally sneered. Just you, okay. It's all settled. Go find someone else. Lu Anhe grabbed Ji Meng's shoulder and said, what does other strength have got anything to do with you? Yi Nan tried to keep his smile, but he couldn't understand it. In the end, he could only watch Lu Anhe walk away with the man who seemed to be of average strength and younger than everyone. The time set by the instructor was about to come. So, unable to do anything, he could only stare at the receding back of the two, bite his teeth, and casually find another recruit as his roommate. But from time to time he looked in their direction just now, and his eyes were unwilling. At the end of the grouping time, the instructor came over with his watch and began to register the rooms one by one. Lu Anhe didn't really give it much thought about what just happened. He just subconsciously thought that there was no need to waste time with the other. What was more, Yi Nan's words made him unhappy and he was afraid Ji Meng would care, so he hurriedly pulled him away. After feeling the heat from the other's shoulders, he was surprised that he had escorted him the whole way. He hurriedly put his hand down and looked at him, noticing that Ji Meng's face was a little red. Due to his introverted nature, Lu Anhe asked apologetically, are you angry? Don't take that person's words to heart. Ji Meng nodded at him. He even nodded to himself, looking very serious. He wasn't perfunctory, I won't. I didn't find you to get rid of him, Lu Anhe thought he should explain. I really think you're very capable. I don't have any other ideas. He saw Ji Meng becoming silent for a while. He also saw Ji Meng blinking his eyes. Ji Meng seemed to be thinking about something. Ji Meng was seemingly digesting what he had said. When he finished observing all that, the other man gave a habitual, oh, first, and then looked up solemnly and said, thank you. Lu Anhe, whose mood had been ruined by Yi Nan, suddenly felt better. He was about the same height as Ji Meng, and there was no obvious difference in their body shape, he just thought the other party was cute. He smiled and gently pulled Ji Meng's hair, thanking me for what? We'll be friends every night in the future. Don't be too constrained. As soon as he finished, he wondered if it was impolite, but Ji Meng didn't seem to mind at all. Taking note of his words and laughed again, Be quiet, the instructor said indifferently, your grouping records have been received. Now let's announce the comprehensive score ranking. Which of you wants to know it first? Some people were still hesitant to raise their hands. Suddenly, a loud, I want to, came from the crowd. Everyone followed the sound and found that it was Yi Nan who had a little reluctance in his eyes. The drillmaster didn't beat around the bush. But when he looked up at Yi Nan, he noticed a peculiar look in his eyes. Before Yi Nan could figure out what it was, he heard the drillmaster coldly repeat his name and said, Yi Nan. C. etc. Generally, the level of everyone would be within the 5 ranges of AE, while only 4 people could drive top-level mecha, which were separately defined as S. Yi Nan was completely stunned. He never thought he would be of this level. Although he wasn't as good as Imperial Military University students, he was recommended by the school at least. In fact, he knew that he couldn't get an S, but he was looking forward to an A, or maybe a B. His whole demeanor was like it was drenched with cold water. How could it be? How could it be C? The instructor said without emotion, "Do you think you can get high marks with a little physical strength?" Yi Nan blushed. "I'm not bad at anything else either." "Oh," the drillmaster continued. "But the comprehensive records show that your last theory was exactly the same as that of the second half of another soldier's, and there's a prior absence from training. In addition, you have been lazy in the unified training, cheating and playing tricks." This was undoubtedly a public blow to his face. Everyone looked at him with various expressions on their faces. Only soldiers with good physique who disdain training are rated C, which is already a very high score. Next, with Yi Nan's move, some soldiers who had been eager to know their level retracted their raised hands. Seeing that someone hesitated and didn't waste time, the instructor began to read the levels by name. Yi Ling and Lu Anhei unsurprisingly both got S's grade. Another soldier with good strength also got the same result. When they read their names, the instructor simply handed over the key to the mecha. For a moment, everyone looked at them with envy or excitement. When Ji Meng saw Lu Anhei take the key and return to the queue, he laughed and said, "Congratulations." When the other party looked at him, Lu Anhei felt that he wanted to pull his hair again. Fortunately, he held back this time. There were still a small number of people who had not been read out, so everyone was waiting for their own or friend's evaluation. Suddenly, Yi Nan, who had been ashamed and silent after learning his grade, came up to Ji Meng and said with disdain, "What luck. From now on you won't have the same training course as us." The tone of voice was really sinister. Ji Meng nodded. "Oh." Lu Anhei tensed his mouth to endure laughing. He didn't expect that Ji Meng's coils express so many different emotions. He may be a little slow when facing others, but he was serious when facing himself. And now he was facing Yi Nan. Such a simple syllable has made the other party eat defeat successfully without confrontation. Really got a good deal. Oh. Yi Nan found that this man seemed to be different from what he thought. He felt like the air was stuck in his chest. He was ready to leave. And heard the instructor read Ji Meng's name. Yi Nan stood still again. I don't know whether it's a D or an E. After all, he was AC himself. He couldn't imagine that Ji Meng, who was a bit reclusive and meek, could get a higher grade. Ji Meng answered the instructor, "Here." The instructor paused for a moment and silently looked up at Ji Meng. There was a moment of silence. Yi Nan thought that his time to laugh at others had finally come. "Ji Meng," the instructor looked back and read the information on the light screen, "S. Come and get your keys." "Yes." Ji Meng passed Yi Nan without sparing him a glance as he went forward and received the key to the mecha that everyone wanted. When he returned to the group, Lu Anhei next to him finally couldn't help laughing and picking up the other party's hair again. He repeated what Ji Meng had just said to him. "Congratulations." Ji Meng also laughed. "Oh," and the tiger teeth between lips peeked out again. The training department didn't give them time to breathe. The next day after they were divided into groups, they began a new training. After the dormitory was divided, the conditions were much better. Lu Anhei was already good at getting along with people. Ji Meng's restraint basically disappeared after only a day or two. Although it was sometimes similar to others, it was much better with Lu Anhei. S-level training was more tiring than other levels. Most of the troops were ready to rest after eating in the canteen, but they still had to carry out later evening training. However, Ji Meng has never dropped out of the team. Whether in physical and mental training or in the operation of the mecha, Ji Meng's scores were comparable to his. Lu Anhei was surprised to find that his roommate was hiding so well. On this day it was already very late when they finally finished their training, so most of them were ready to go to bed. Lu Anhei suddenly patted Ji Meng on the shoulder, "Old Ji." The other turned to look at him. Lu Anhei smoothly put his arm on his shoulder as they walked together. "Are you hungry?" Ji Meng honestly replied, "I'm not hungry." He thought for a while then asked, "Are you hungry?" Lu Anhei, "I'm not hungry either." Ji Meng looked at him before nodding, "Oh. But I'm craving something." Lu Anhei shamelessly stated, "I'm going to sneak to the back kitchen of the canteen to find something to eat. Do you want me to bring some for you?" "Oh." Ji Meng listened. "I'll go too." Then he started walking to the canteen. Lu Anhei tugged at him and said, "Don't leave. If I get caught, I'll be fine. I'm afraid that you." Before he finished, he suddenly heard someone approaching. "I was wondering who it was. And it turned out to be you guys." It was Yi Nan's voice. Since he failed to be grouped together with Lu Anhei the last time, and he fell into the C class. He hasn't been publicly punished by the instructor, so this group of recruits had some estrangement from Yi Nan. Yi Nan attributed all his failures to these two people. He thought highly of himself, believing that the training of Class C was completely inconsistent with his strength. He breathed a sigh every day. He looked at the two people in front of him, talking and laughing when he came out of the training ground, as if they could easily cope with their heavy training. Lu Anhei put his hand on Ji Meng's shoulder and smiled casually. Recalling that he had been thrown away by Lu Anhei that day, he felt even worse. So he said disdainfully, "This is the style of S-class students." He even figured out how to make fun of him, but just as he was about to say the next sentence, Ji Meng gave an "oh," seriously wondering, "What's the problem?" Class C student, the author has something to say. There will be progress in the next chapter. Chapter 129. Yi Nan was dumbfounded when he came up and said, "This is the style of S-class students." Ji Meng. "Oh." Yi Nan said unconvincingly, "You exploit the canteen's loopholes, and simply don't take the rules seriously." "Oh." Lu Anhei also slowly followed Ji Meng's tone, "I did this on my first day here, and it didn't affect me to get an S grade." At that time he was the first one to raise his hand and ask for his score confidently, ending up with a C grade. This incident has become a psychological shadow of Yi Nan, and hearing people mention it, his face was almost red. Lu Anhei narrowed his eyes, "You're the one who started the trouble, and you're the one who couldn't stop and had a tough mouth. What exactly is your business here?" Naturally, he had a few issues. But because he didn't like the look of the two, he rushed up to them to say a couple of words. The point was that he hated them. Although the training content was different, the intensity varied. The Army routine periodic assessment would have all of them regularly drilled and audited in various ways, and then each time the results would be recorded and the scores would be recalculated on the basis of the cadet's individual rank. According to the time projection, there would soon be a new examination. Because of the different training, everyone's progress varied. Where the training intensity was higher, the students would certainly be getting better in the assessment, like a snowball. So that at the end only the best would remain, and those who couldn't keep up with the progress would regrettably had to leave. Yi Nan has always been upset. So recently he would pay special attention to the S and other students' training situation, wanting to see if he still had an opportunity. The two of them were now angry after his mocking words, so his original plan to ask about the training with a smile seemed to be impossible. A little hatred grew in his heart. Maybe he could have been Lu Anhei's roommate if he had persuaded him a few more times, but this person, who had no presence at all, came out of nowhere, and even if he had spoken rudely, he dragged Lu Anhei with him. He completely forgot that he had received benefits from Lu Anhei at the beginning of the camp, and also forgot that it had nothing to do with the decision of the other. But the shame he felt when the results were announced was still fresh in his mind, and an alpha was naturally competitive. So this emotion quickly festered, making him no longer friendly to the person in front of him at first. "Aren't you leaving yet?" The daily training time was long enough, so spending more time with this person was a complete waste of time, and Lu Anhei didn't want to talk any more nonsense. He obviously asked this for the unpleasant encounter to end, and without even waiting for an answer, moved his gaze away, hooked Ji Meng's shoulder and turned away. The two of them didn't pay attention to him again. Ji Meng let him hook his shoulder and walk back, only to find that the other really intended to return to the dormitory, before asking, "Aren't you going to eat?" "No." Lu Anhei's voice didn't sound unhappy. Ji Meng tilted his head to look over. The other man was still wearing the training uniform, but in the darkness no one would see his appearance, so he took off his hat, lazily playing with it. The not-so-bright street light fell on his profile, as Lu Anhei raised a smile. "I'm not craving anymore." "Oh." Ji Meng nodded his head. No one took the matter to heart. So Lu Anhei said goodbye to Ji Meng and went to take a shower first, but he didn't expect that when he walked out of the bathroom with my hair wiped, there was no one in the house. His roommate didn't go out much except for training, and would occasionally look at the latest mecha designs when he was free, so it was clear that he really wanted to own a mecha. Lu Anhei called Ji Meng's name twice in confusion without response, frowning and wondering where he went. In the training department, you couldn't use a personal communicator with too many functions, so everyone used a special communicator that would only work in the camp. He was wiping his hair when he noticed a little noise coming from Ji Meng's desk and saw that the other didn't bring his communicator. Lu Anhei wanted to go over and help him turn it off, but heard that Ji Meng's connection tone wasn't the standard one. It was a song he had never heard before, with an ancient and exotic tune, a unique and unfamiliar voice with a gentle melancholy, a heart-wrenching ballad. He had just put his hand over it when a door opened. Ji Meng stood in the doorway, holding something in his hand, so Lu Anhei shook the communicator in his hand. "I was just about to you." The other nodded, so Lu Anhei added, "Very nice tune." Ji Meng's eyes showed a little happiness. I especially like it. I even think that if I have my own mecha in the future, I will give it this name. That would be convenient for you. Lu Anhei's tone was full of certainty. Ji Meng smiled along with him, then remembered something and said, "Oh, this is for you." As he spoke, he handed the item in his hand to Lu Anhei. It was a piece of cake that was still warm. Borrowed the canteen baking machine to make it. Ji Meng's smiling eyes were very bright. "You just said you lost your craving. But it was surely just spoiled. I went through the ingredients that can be used quickly in the canteen and that's it." He was confident in his craft. "It won't be noticed. Try it quickly." Lu Anhei froze for a rare moment. "Is that what you just went to make?" Ji Meng felt nothing wrong, and even thought that Lu Anhei disliked it, so he hurriedly said, "I used to make these all the time, and it tastes very good." Lu Anhei tossed the towel aside, the tips of his hair still wet with moisture, took the cake from Ji Meng's hand and threw it into his mouth in one bite. The two were so close that Ji Meng could smell the pleasant scent of the other person's body just after showering, so his eyes dodged for a moment. He grabbed his clean clothes and went to the bathroom. I'm going to take a shower." Lu Anhei swallowed it. The taste was indeed very good. The handicraft of the logistics department was estimated to be no match for him. He called Ji Meng's name. The other party stood still in response, but didn't turn around. Lu Anhei lost his smile. He didn't expect that the low-key good student would now actually be stuck in the surveillance, sneaking to the cafeteria at night, just to bake a cake for his roommate. He smiled at Ji Meng's back and said, "Did you learn to be mischievous from me?" This time Ji Meng turned back, half of his face sideways and said, "I was never a good person. I don't know if I'm a good person or not." Lu Anhei laughed in his heart. He stuffed the remaining half of the cake into his mouth again, smiling and taking a step closer, because he knew Ji Meng wanted to take a shower. Simply nonchalantly used the hand that had just touched the cake to pull a handful of the other's hair, leaving a little fresh sweet fragrance. "Okay. Then go wash it, bad egg." The stage cycle test soon began. This was the first time since the grouping, so they all paid particular attention. This was a large exercise. But instead of going to a distant border area like the base, the exercise was conducted internally. The grouping was a personal lottery system. The same lodging people may be teammates, but may also be opponents. The contents of the exercise varied. But of course the most important thing was to destroy the core command of one of the parties, which was considered a victory. Ji Meng and Lu Anhei didn't draw the same group, and when the exercise was about to begin, Lu Anhei patted Ji Meng as he stuck to the blue side's badge, "Bad egg. Want to show mercy?" The other was amused by him. "That also depends on whether you give the opportunity." The two of them casually chatted a few words before returning to their respective teams, and when Lu Anhei looked at his teammate beside him, he didn't hide his dissatisfaction. Yi Nan actually drew a group with him. However, he didn't really feel the need to be concerned about this. The number of unified mechs used in the exercise was limited, and the number of restrictions or other training requirements didn't allow for one person to have a mecha, so sometimes there would be a situation where the previous person ran out and then a person continued to pilot against enemy. Instead, Yi Nan, as if forgetting the unpleasantness of that day, took the initiative to ask him, "Lao Lu, the mecha assigned to you, which gear do you use to start the engine with?" Lu Anhei looked at him lightly. "Both can be used." Yi Nan didn't get a clear answer, so he didn't ask again. Lu Anhei didn't drive the mecha this round, but was assigned to a ground team and decisively chose to continue to close in, first wiping out a wave of defensive forces on the opposite side, and then began to communicate with his teammates. "The defense is weak at 9 o'clock, but it is too far from my group. Apply for a long-range mecha to annihilate." Yi Nan's voice rang out in the mecha, "Roger." A few seconds later, the dedicated maneuver bomb flew forward in the direction Lu Anhe said, "Completed attack." Of course the red side wasn't likely to fall over like that. Yi Ling, who was in charge of the defense, had already predicted the strike point and entered the program to interfere with the missile when it was about to reach him, and eventually the trajectory deviated and the blue fire failed to hit. Lu Anhe narrowed his eyes and listened to the reports of the other team members. This was not a successful attack. Yi Nan stammered. I followed the instructions. Do you need to be reminded of such things as orbital deviation and calculation? Someone began to reprimand over the communicator. Lu Anhe rubbed his face and continued to advance with his team. But every time it came time to need mecha support, the other team's controls always went wrong, and although it wasn't a major problem, it directly led to blue slowly burying the advantage they started with, gradually being dragged into their dominant zone by red. "How about we switch mecha drivers?" a member of the group suggested over the communicator. The originally competitive Yi Nan took the initiative this time and said, "Okay. I'm not playing steadily, I'll go to the ground troops. Are you coming, Luo Lu?" Everyone knew Lu Anhe's strength, so after hearing Yi Nan speak, they agreed with him. He didn't refuse and agreed with a "MN." When he arrived at the mecha interchange, he found that Yi Nan hadn't done a good job of concealing the facility, so the location of their mecha could easily be discovered by the other side. He raised an eyebrow and got into the mecha, observing the cockpit and the display before saying, "Continue." What happened next was exactly what they predicted. After Lu Anhe sent 2 rounds in a row, the blue mecha's position was revealed. And red decided not to hunker down in the camp while the blue team wasn't paying attention. It seemed to be trying to go past the other tedious steps and tackle the blue mecha directly first. "Old Lu, watch out." The red mecha came in aggressively, with its engine fire turned up to the maximum, coming straight at Lu Anhe with the maximum intensity acceptable for the drill. Lu Anhe reacted quickly, first taking 2 steps back immediately, then using the distance and shockwave at this point to take advantage of the opportunity to fend off the first wave of attacks, and everyone thought he would continue to retreat. But he suddenly fired up a return attack in midair, igniting the arsenal of weapons he wanted to counterattack. The red mecha was clearly excited, too. And it was clear that the pilot inside was very skilled and experienced, dodging several of Lu Anhe's attempts to catch him in the act, and even managing to build up his energy in the process, trying to take advantage of the situation and attack again. At the same time, the blue mecha's arsenal of weapons had already been successfully built up, and his right arm was glowing brightly, as he was about to attack the red mecha. To their surprise, the blue mecha's fuselage suddenly shook violently, and the light of the right arm, which had successfully stored energy, was instantly dimmed. And the whole mecha lunged forward as if it was out of control. This was the pilot failed to adjust the initial driving parameters. This was a very basic mistake, but also a very fatal mistake. If this happened on a real battlefield, it was almost equal to becoming a sitting duck. The key problem now was that if the mecha really got out of control and the pilot didn't control it well, even though it was loaded with virtual ammunition, it would still fall hard from midair with the mecha, and might get injured. In the next second, the red mecha instantly sensed this, and immediately stopped all attacks, accelerating towards Lu Anhe's mecha, using its impact as momentum to hold the other side up without falling until it landed unharmed. The soldier from the blue side spoke in a whisper over the communication. Old Lu missed. He would actually fail to do such a basic check. It shouldn't be. It's a bit of a pity. Maybe it could have been a fight. It's good that it was a drill, and it's good that the other side saw it, or Old Lu might have had to fall and hurt himself. Yeah. Old Lu, how are you? Can you hear me? Lu Anhe readjusted his communicator and said through clenched teeth, yes. Although he wasn't injured, the impact of the sudden fall and the collision with the other mecha was still very strong, which made him sit in the driver's seat for a few minutes to recover. There was a small accident, and the exercise was suspended to check the safety of the mecha and personnel, with all channels temporarily turned on. Just as everyone was wondering who was driving the red mecha, everyone heard a teenage boy's voice with a touch of anger, "Is Yi Nan there?" An enthusiastic soldier immediately reported a location. "Here he is." "What's wrong?" Everyone watched as the red-sided mecha moved and drove directly to where Yi Nan was. A few moments later, The cockpit door opened and a teenager in a pilot's suit came out of it. He seemed to have a good temper in everyone's eyes, and although he didn't say much, he always seemed to be smiling. At this moment, however, there was no smile on his face, and the emotion in his eyes was even icy cold. He came down from the elevator and walked step by step to Yi Nan. Just when Yi Nan wanted to speak, the other party suddenly pointed a laser gun at his forehead. Apologize. Ji Meng's face was expressionless, and the original quietness, friendliness, and occasional blush from the training sessions all disappeared, only the tightly pursed lips and cold eyes remained. Everyone froze. Although they knew that there was no live ammunition in the dispensing gun, to make such a move so brazenly in a non-drill situation was undoubtedly against the rules. You were driving the last wave. You must have changed the engine parameters of this mecha to try to induce him to fall, right? When he said this, everyone understood why Lu Anhe had made such a cheap mistake. It turned out that it was the previous person who had tampered with it. Ji Meng slightly moved his index finger, pressed the gun harder against the other person's forehead, and repeated what he had just said. I said. Apologize to him. Lu Anhe found Ji Meng in the confinement room. He sneaked in. Because the other was punished with a week of confinement to reflect on his mistakes, during which he couldn't participate in other training. Of course, Yi Nan, who maliciously framed his teammate, was sent directly out of the training department and never had the chance to come back in. When Lu Anhe entered the confinement room, Ji Meng was staring at the window while holding his cheeks. He looked like he was in a good mood, not very depressed at all. Lu Anhe knocked on the wall before Ji Meng came back from his daze. Why are you here? He didn't finish his sentence, but Lu Anhe covered his mouth with his hand. Ji Meng couldn't say anything, and was left looking at the other with unblinking eyes. I came here secretly. So keep your voice down, Lu Anhe said, then removed his palm from the other's face, which still had a warm breath on it. I wanted to see how my roommate is doing. Nothing major, Ji Meng said. Let me see what the reason for your confinement is. Lu Anhe walked over and looked at the line on Ji Meng's light brain. Bullying a fellow soldier. He read it out. After all, pointing a gun at the other party was a very serious offense, and even though the other party was at fault, Ji Meng was still punished by the training department. But hearing this, Ji Meng, who was still in a good mood, suddenly opened his mouth stiffly. He's not a fellow soldier. He pursed his lips and said very stubbornly. He deliberately framed his teammate, which makes him unworthy of being called a fellow soldier. Luckily I noticed it. Hey. Don't be angry. Don't be angry, Lu Anhe said hastily. I knew he wanted to get me. And I could also ensure that nothing would happen to me, so I let him do it. Otherwise it would be troublesome if he denied it and we had no proof. Then, Ji Meng spoke. But then repeated, anyway. He's not a fellow soldier. Okay. Okay. Not a fellow soldier, Lu Anhe laughed, feeling as if he needed to coax his roommate. Lu Anhe flicked the teenager's forehead and spoke with a smile. I'm your fellow soldier. Okay. Chapter 130. Hearing him say that, the always smart Ji Meng was half slow and said, what? Lu Anhe helplessly repeated again, but his tone unconsciously softened a bit. I said. I am your fellow soldier. He had never spoken to an alpha like this before and should have felt strange or uncomfortable, but unexpectedly. Lu Anhe now just wanted to make his roommate happy. Oh, Ji Meng replied in a low voice, then looked up again and said, MN, with a smile. The other's mood changed only for a moment, but Lu Anhe was still keenly aware that Ji Meng was somehow depressed. He didn't hesitate to go closer. Squatting in front of Ji Meng, and said sincerely, I'm really fine, believe me. I had a sense of measure and didn't get hurt. But, he thought about it and said, how did you find out that the person on the mecha was me? The moves, Ji Meng said. It was obvious. He then mentioned a few details about his mecha driving that even Lu Anhe himself wasn't aware of. For example, how he would unconsciously veer to the right at startup, or how he would habitually store energy in the calibrator even during maneuvers, and so on. Only after Ji Meng finished the fifth point did he conclude in a clear manner, so it must have been you. Lu Anhe lost his smile, then said very solemnly, thank you nonetheless. Although he had estimated that there would be no serious consequences, he was clear that Ji Meng's first-time protection still saved him from a more serious impact. Since you're confined for a week, Lu Anhe mulled, then I will come over every day to keep you company, and tell you about the daily training content to prevent you from falling behind, okay? Ji Meng didn't expect him to say that, and just when he wanted to say something, Lu Anhe covered his mouth with his hand again. So he couldn't say anything else. After confirming that Ji Meng would not say, no, don't, or any other refusal, Lu Anhe removed his hand and pinched his hair again. These days he has become more and more comfortable with this action, okay? Don't refuse, I won't be found out. Oh. Ji Meng nodded. Lu Anhe briefly told him about today's training, and after that, he chatted with Ji Meng for a while, complaining about the small size of the confinement room, saying it was very inhumane. During this time, someone brought over food. So Lu Anhe immediately stood close to the innermost wall, holding his breath without saying a word, so no one noticed anything out of the ordinary. Only when it was late did he sneak back in as he had come. After confirming that Lu Anhe had left for good, Ji Meng sat alone on the bed in his confinement room, remembering what Lu Anhe had told him during the day, and finally opened his mouth with a voice that only he could hear. I won't refuse. Ah. The following week, Lu Anhe really did as he said, finding opportunities every day despite the pressure, and sneaked to the confinement room to accompany Ji Meng for a period of time. The last day it seemed that the instructor was suspicious. But in view of Lu Anhe's care for his roommate and the fact that the matter was really Ji Meng's mistake for the sake of Lu Anhe, it wasn't pursued in the end. Ji Meng was locked up not knowing that in the past few days, every time the people remembered that day, they lamented that this recruit that was always smiling without a presence or talking much actually had such strength. From then on no one dared to underestimate him. Nor did they dare to speak more of the matter, only accusing Yi Nan, who had already left the team, of not being anything good. Actually not hesitating to take advantage of the exercise because of jealousy. What was puzzling to them was that in the next examination, Ji Meng still showed remarkable competence and was far ahead in the overall score, as if the previous week of confinement didn't have any effect on his training. After that, the entire training department gradually went on the right track, and the trainees began to adapt to the intensity of each level of training, doing their best to break through and work hard to be a truly outstanding soldier. Since then, Ji Meng hasn't been in the confinement room, and this matter was no longer mentioned as time went by. Soon, the day of completion was approaching. The training was finally loosening up a bit towards the end, and if necessary, students could choose a training intensity that suited them. After all, everything was in preparation for the final assessment. Students didn't have to worry about this. These 2 years they have endured all kinds of suffering, so their training was also ahead of everyone else and they could basically pass the assessment with a high score. Therefore, these days, it was mainly the students of other grades who came to the former S-class training ground to practice, while the S-class students had a rare chance to relax for a few days. The last day before the end of the school year Lu Anhe seemed to have gone out early. Ji Meng didn't care at first. After all, these days there were always other levels of students who came to them, either for sparring or for guidance. Both of them had good personalities, and they basically wouldn't refuse. So Ji Meng didn't think too much when he found out that Lu Anhe wasn't in the dorm. It wasn't until lunchtime, when everyone was seated in the cafeteria, that Ji Meng looked around and couldn't find the familiar shadow, which gave rise to some doubts. After all, his roommate was the #1 glutton, and recently the two didn't secretly store snacks in the dormitory, so how come Lu Anhe didn't come to the cafeteria? Seeing that a long time has passed, Ji Meng finally couldn't hold back and sat down next to one of the A students who was looking for Lu Anhe for training yesterday. Have you seen Lu Anhe? Your old Lu. After all, the two always appear in the dormitory as a unit. They were so sticky that others would often joke about it, so when he heard Ji Meng's question, the cadet specially added a, "You're, as well, he didn't tell you?" He answered after mulling it over, "Yes. This kind of thing is almost the same whether I tell you or not. He's in the pheromone isolation room." After all, they were all alpha, so Ji Meng instantly understood. Okay. Thanks. The participants were basically all alpha, beta were rare. So what needed attention was the susceptibility period. In order to prevent the susceptible alpha from influencing each other and eventually fighting, the training department has long been prepared for this. Specifically for the susceptible alpha, they prepared a fully equipped pheromone isolation room. The trainee with the susceptible period would apply for entry, and the isolation room not only to ensure that the alpha in the inside pheromone would not leak out and affect others, but despite the susceptible period without inhibitors. The isolation room still thoughtfully prepared a class omega pheromone slow-release agent, so that the alpha wasn't too tormented. The cadet watched Ji Meng suddenly stand up and walk straight towards the entrance of the canteen, holding his spoon in his mouth and saying, "No. Where are you going? No training this afternoon." He couldn't be heading to the isolation room, right? Even the best of brothers weren't like this, suffering together. The thing about susceptibility was that they were all alpha, and if anyone was susceptible, they would certainly avoid them with the best of intentions. Not to mention the discomfort of not avoiding it, who wanted to go up against the same type of pheromone at the most horrible time. It would also be a lose-lose situation. The most important thing was that Lu Anhei's performance in the training department was known to everyone. His susceptible period was bound to come raging. Unless someone really wanted to deliberately provoke trouble, no one would go up to ask for trouble. Lu Anhei locked himself in the isolation room by himself, and he only turned on the room's soothing spray. The omega pheromone-like slow-release agent was put aside, but not turned on. He was still complacent about his susceptibility and not being discovered by Ji Meng. After all, in the past 2 years he has been stuck in Ji Meng's personal training or other unavailable times, so he couldn't shut himself off in the isolation room, and only after it passed would he return as if nothing had happened. Unnoticed. Sometimes Ji Meng would ask why he hasn't seen his susceptible period. And Lu Anhei would smoothly dismiss him with reasons such as, "My susceptible period isn't that difficult." And, "The isolation room of the slow-release agent is very good and effective." When he was gritting his teeth to survive a wave of suffocating heat, he suddenly heard a noise from the door. Lu Anhei was still half leaning on the sofa, unable to support his body, when he noticed a person through the glass door outside. Ji Meng pursed his lips and stood outside without saying a word, his eyes staring straight at him with sweat dripping down his forehead. The glass door isolated Lu Anhei's overflowing pheromone, and likewise isolated his voice. He stood up from the sofa, took a step to the door, printed his finger on the door, shook his head at Ji Meng and made a gesture. He knew Ji Meng could read lips, and Lu Anhei said, "Why are you here? Go back quickly." But Ji Meng walked closer as if he didn't understand, and put his hand over the clear glass door, looking like their fingers were pressed together. "I'm fine." Lu Anhei still wanted to continue, but found that Ji Meng's eyes strayed and landed on the untouched omega slow-release pills on a side table. "It's over." Lu Anhei suddenly thought to himself. He was discovered. When he was plotted against by Yi Nan, Ji Meng was able to pull out his gun in front of everyone and make the other party apologize to him, and now he found out that he wasn't taking care of himself during his susceptibility period, and he didn't know what Ji Meng would say or do after he came out. Lu Anhei felt strange. It was clear that Ji Meng looked harmless and always allowed him to grip his hair, but now he had a bad feeling. "I'll wait until the susceptibility period is over and apologize to old Ji." Lu Anhei decided in his mind. "For now, let him go back." Lu Anhei thought so, and before he could speak again, he saw that Ji Meng had no intention of leaving, and began to observe how to open the door. It was easy to open such a door for Ji Meng, so when Lu Anhei saw that he was ready to break in directly, he was afraid that he would enter the confinement room again because of this. He finally sighed and took the initiative to open the door for him. As soon as the door of the isolation room opened, a high concentration of alpha pheromone slammed unceremoniously in his face. Ji Meng gritted his teeth, resisted the repulsive shock, took 2 steps in and closed the door. In fact, Lu Anhei's pheromone wasn't unpleasant, a very fresh grassy smell. But the susceptible period wrapped in the alpha's unique desire to control and destroy, so Ji Meng. Another alpha wasn't feeling too good. "Lao Ji," Lu Anhei's voice was a little soft, the corners of his mouth barely pulled a smile. "What are you doing here?" "I didn't tell you about my susceptible period, nothing else," he explained. "I'm just afraid you wouldn't be able to stand my pheromone and fight with me, that wouldn't be good." Ji Meng still did not speak. Still trying to endure the other pheromone pressure over his discomfort, Lu Anhei himself didn't even know what he was nervous about. They were of the same kind. If their pheromone clashed, it would be extremely repulsive, they would be mutually annoyed, and wouldn't be able to control themselves to do excessive things. He was worried about him seeing him in this state, which was why he didn't tell Ji Meng. Lu Anhe felt a little thirsty, but more anxious, and unspeakably irritated. His previous calm and relaxed manner nowhere to be seen. Old Ji. You. He wanted to say, don't look at me like that. Why don't you use the slow-release agent? Ji Meng shifted his eyes back to him, looking at his chest that was blotted out a little by sweat, and the outline of his collarbone could be faintly seen. It has a really strange smell, I don't like it. Lu Anhe originally wanted to find an excuse, but finally replied truthfully. After all, the simulated class Omega pheromone would still feel really weird. He saw Ji Meng smile very shallowly, clearly reflecting the teenager from 2 years ago. But it wasn't quite right somehow. Me too, Ji Meng said. I don't like to use that during my susceptible period. Lu Anhe laughed dryly. Right. You're quirky, Ji Meng nodded. But had no intention of leaving. The smell of grass in the air filled their nostrils. Lu Anhe only smelled his own, and he knew Ji Meng was restraining, trying not to let himself be hooked up to pheromone along with his instincts. What's the smell of old Ji's pheromone? Lu Anhe suddenly wondered. Don't worry, Ji Meng's voice was a little strained, I won't let out my pheromone, so it won't affect you. I just think. Last time I was confined you were with me every day, it's all about to end, and I want to help you. But what can an alpha do to help? It wasn't good to add to the mess. Lu Anhe looked at Ji Meng silently for 2 seconds. Then his smile renewed. Old Ji. His face was the most common smile of all. Lu Anhe naturally got along with people, so he wouldn't feel uncomfortable with him. He was like a little son who would always take care of those around him. Mn. Ji Meng also looked at him seriously. They had been together for 2 years and had never blushed, and everyone said that the two were the most compatible in the whole camp in one dormitory. So Lu Anhe felt that such awkwardness was nothing in front of his brother. Actually, I don't feel so good. Lu Anhe still smiled brightly, as if he wasn't going through a susceptible period, or try to hug me. As soon as the words left his mouth, Lu Anhe felt that he had come up with a bad idea. What was he thinking when he asked an alpha to hug another susceptible alpha? But that was what he really thought at that moment, and he knew Ji Meng was standing in front of him helpless and unable to do much. He just wanted to say something to cover up this self-created embarrassment, but he didn't expect the other party to open his mouth before him. All right. Ji Meng nodded his head, his tone was not a bit joking. All right then. Old Ji, you. Lu Anhe didn't finish his sentence before he was pulled into the arms of Ji Meng, who suddenly approached him and hugged him firmly. Ji Meng hugged so hard that it wasn't until he touched him that Lu Anhe realized that the other wasn't actually very calm, and that he had been holding back. Had been forced to the edge of the cliff by his pheromone, but was forcing himself to keep his nature from overflowing. His muscles trembled slightly as he reached out and clasped Lu Anhe's head onto his shoulder and asked, "Is it any better?" Lu Anhe wanted to say, no. How could two alphas make each other better? But when his reasoning returned, he unexpectedly felt that it really didn't seem that uncomfortable. Maybe Ji Meng's hug was too sincere. Lu Anhe's teeth and claws of pheromone were finally pressed down a little, but he was still sweating. He wanted to break away from this hug, it was too tight. But he didn't. That was the comfort of his family's old Lu to endure his inner nature. He finally simply leaned against Ji Meng's shoulder, slowly waiting for this burst of pheromone to subside. The tip of his nose was pressed against the back of Ji Meng's neck, where the alpha gland was located, but the man, in order to not let him feel uncomfortable, didn't even let out a little bit of his pheromone. Lu Anhe was thinking about it and wanted to back away, but when he did so, he accidentally brushed against Ji Meng's gland. It's over. He thought to himself, guess it's still going to end in a fight. 2 years of a good roommate relationship was about to be ruined. Unexpectedly, Ji Meng just stifled a grunt. Then reclasped Lu Anhe into his arms and gave a light laugh. Want to bite? Chapter 131. Lu Anhe couldn't smell Ji Meng's pheromone, but was choked on the spot by the words he uttered. If you want to bite, you can bite. But you can't mark. Ji Meng's tone was very relaxed, just make yourself more comfortable. It was as if the matter of letting an alpha bite another was just a little joke. He even pressed himself towards Lu Anhei encouragingly, patting him on the back. Although Ji Meng has tried very hard not to let his instincts overflow, Lu Anhei in the moment of closeness still felt a physical sense of resistance. This feeling wasn't brought by Ji Meng, it was when an alpha was closer to another alpha than a certain threshold, their physiology begins to resist first, screaming to suppress, wanting to fight. This was also the time when Lu Anhei realized so clearly that even though his roommate was never red-faced with him, he would educate the student who did it for him even though he was in confinement. He would sneak past the surveillance to the cafeteria just to bake him a little late-night snack. They did a lot of things together secretly. The other person would smile and show his familiar tiger teeth. His voice and demeanor were as vivid as a teenager's, and he could even effortlessly recall every detail of the other person's smile, but he was an alpha. He was an alpha whose strength was far above most people, with the same desire to conquer as all of his kind, his pheromone incompatible with his. Lu Anhei originally wanted to struggle, but when he remembered that they didn't have a fight, and how it was thanks to Ji Meng not releasing his own pheromone. Or let him go. Old Ji was also quite difficult. But to bite him. Lu Anhei felt a little strange, he had no idea why Ji Meng said that. What would happen if one really bit down? The other's glands would be pierced by sharp teeth, he would taste blood. As well as the non-negligible physical resistance, and the taste of the other party's pheromone. He was suddenly curious, so. To relieve the current inexplicable atmosphere, he picked a topic to talk about. Old Ji. What does your pheromone smell like? It was like he was inviting himself to bite on it. Lu Anhei's scalp tingled. But what normal alpha would actively invite its own kind to mark itself? He was a bit speechless. His intuition told him that today's Ji Meng wasn't like usual, but now he was in a period of susceptibility and couldn't analyze the specific problem. When he was still struggling with how to respond to Ji Meng, the other suddenly said, "Forget it, and I'm just kidding." Then he felt the other man's hands around his arms loosen some, as if to say, "You could break free at any time." Ji Meng originally also rested his head on Lu Anhei's shoulder, and because of this action, he straightened up. But at this moment, the other's lips seemed to unintentionally brush against his glands. Lu Anhei only felt a momentary coldness, and Ji Meng left in a very measured manner. In the gap between their embrace and separation, he felt Ji Meng run his fingers very lightly over his wrist with a fine and crispy itch. "I won't tease you anymore," Ji Meng said faintly. He was still smiling. But there was a little more heartache in his eyes. Lu Anhei's heart trembled at this moment. He knew that Ji Meng wanted to help him, but because of the shackle of being the same kind, he couldn't do anything. So, when Ji Meng was about to push him away, Lu Anhei still couldn't bear to stop him. Old Ji, he simply put himself at the center, like the countless times he reached for his shoulders, using a little force to pull Ji Meng back into his arms. "Let me hold you for a while. Don't go yet." Lu Anhei felt that when he re-hugged Ji Meng, the other almost stiffened his whole body, seemingly incredulous at this move of his. But soon, after he said that, he relaxed again, and then leaned over as if relieved, smiling and saying, "Oh." He said he wouldn't leave and really stayed with Lu Anhei until it was getting light. During that time Lu Anhei finally felt better for a while and took a nap under the soothing spray in the isolation room to regain some strength. When he woke up again, Ji Meng also had his eyes closed and was resting on his lap. Lu Anhei didn't dare to move. After all, they have lived together for so long. Lu Anhei knew that Ji Meng's sleep was very light, the slightest movement could wake him up, and then it took a long time for him to fall asleep again. The most uncomfortable moment has passed. And he could finally remember what happened in the afternoon during this short period of time. Ji Meng came over to keep him company. The two didn't even eat dinner, just stayed late at night in the isolation room, hastily drinking 2 alpha nutrients from the storage cabinet. At that time, Ji Meng sat on the floor and leaned against the wall and laughed, saying, "Do we look a bit miserable now?" Lu Anhei, after all, consumed a lot of mental and physical strength, so he looked a little weak, also followed up his joke, saying they were a little like the kind of TV-pulling bitter couple. Then Ji Meng just laughed, went aside to throw away the packaging, and asked if he still wanted to hug him later. Lu Anhei recalled that it seemed 2 people were better than 1, although the other one was an alpha. He replied yes. "Want to hug, would you hug?" Ji Meng bent the corners of his mouth silently. Of course. The two haven't hugged after that. Lu Anhe wanted him to go back first, but Ji Meng didn't agree, and finally Lu Anhe couldn't convince him, so he told him that he should either lean here to settle for a while. Later on. He didn't know how they fell asleep, and he didn't know who fell asleep first. Anyway. Compared to those susceptible periods before this night seemed to be much better. Lu Anhe looked at the person sleeping in front of him. The other person has been sleeping very well, even if their position didn't seem comfortable at all, he still closed his eyes like usual, sleeping very well. He leaned against his leg, one hand hanging down, the other hand casually resting on his body, in an obviously little awkward sleeping position, but the other seemed to be very satisfied. Ji Meng changed back after sleeping and waking up, as if he was a different person, the little strong look from the afternoon disappeared, and he now looked like a defenseless teenager, pure and transparent. Lu Anhe looked at the time and calculated that he could still let Ji Meng sleep for a few minutes more before waking him up to go to the training ground. Neither of them forgot that today was the final assessment. Lu Anhe was thinking about it when he suddenly felt the person on his lap move. He hurriedly looked over. Ji Meng frowned. Probably sunk in some not-so-good dream. Lu Anhe didn't want to explore other people's dreams, but he overheard the other person mumbling something while asleep. He couldn't hear. And Ji Meng's lips opened and closed very little, so Lu Anhe couldn't tell what Ji Meng was saying, either through his lips or his voice. Suddenly, Lu Anhe felt that the hand Ji Meng placed on his body suddenly clenched. He seemed to be chasing something in his dream, so his expression and voice became painful, and because it was only in the dream, the voice that finally escaped from his lips was as thin as a gnat, and it sounded aggravating to people. Lu Anhe was in a trance. At this moment he suddenly thought, what could make Ji Meng's irritation disappear? If he knew what it was, he would have helped him with all his might, just like the others who came to him today. Ji Meng hadn't been able to come out of that dream, his hand was still rubbing him unconsciously. For some reason, Lu Anhe suddenly remembered that hug this afternoon, remembering how the other's lips, seemingly, brushed his glands. Would he also want to bite down? Would he? But Lu Anhe didn't have a chance to think about it any further. He was strangely aware that his body was undergoing some changes. His reaction was so fast that even when this kind of thing happened, the first thing he did was to give himself a reason, such as this was the aftermath of the susceptible period that hadn't worn off yet, and the alpha he was facing was different. Lu Anhe's thinking suddenly froze. It was true that it was only natural for an alpha to have impulses or certain reactions when meeting an omega during the susceptibility period, but the problem was that Ji Meng wasn't someone different from him. He was an alpha like him. And for 2 years, he stayed with an alpha like himself. Lu Anhe was once glad that he had chosen Ji Meng at that time, although he got along with anyone, but Ji Meng was undoubtedly his closest friend. He didn't need to hide anything from him. In the battlefield he would be assured to leave his back to him, as the other party trusted him without reservation. And now, he was having this unpleasant thought about his best friend. The susceptible period wasn't self-deceiving, so Lu Anhe suddenly couldn't find a reason to convince himself. A few hours ago Ji Meng asked him if he wanted to bite down. Only now did he have the answer. Originally a joke-like question and answer, but he actually wanted to nod his head. He remembered that the first time he noticed Ji Meng, it was because the other said, if an alpha becomes crazy, he would even bite his own kind. Now that he thought about it, he might be that kind of crazy. Ji Meng hasn't woken up from the dream, but Lu Anhe began to panic, not even daring to look at the past, wanting to slightly back away, or the other party continued to move so much, he may be disgusted with him and go crazy. But Lu Anhe just moved a bit, when he saw Ji Meng's frown tighten, his eyelashes twitching. The next second he woke up, he abruptly stood up from the sofa and turned his back. Lu Anhe. Ji Meng did wake up. And he heard the other call his name with a bit of a dazed tone. He didn't respond immediately. To be honest. For the first time, he didn't know how to respond. After a few seconds, there was a sound behind him and Ji Meng seemed to sit up and asked, "Are you feeling better?" Lu Anhe nodded soundlessly. "You?" Ji Meng approached him, and Lu Anhe could feel the other's breath. Ji Meng seemingly wanted to pat his shoulder, but because his back was to him, finally chose to give up. Then it's good. Quote. The final assessment. Lu Anhe didn't know what to speak about at all, and could only say, It's about to start. Ji Meng froze. Lu Anhei, Ji Meng asked again, are you really okay? He just answered in a low voice. Lu Anhei almost stuck to the training ground at a late hour. Ji Meng went out early. And for some reason he didn't continue to accompany him like yesterday, and Lu Anhei didn't dare to ask. Because it was the final assessment, everyone attached great importance to it. After all, these 2 years were coming to an end, no matter what complaints they had, sweat or reluctance, it was also the last time. Today all the instructors also came, they were unusually less harsh. Calling them one by one to the training ground to do the final test. He heard Ji Meng's name. Lu Anhei saw the other walking calmly to the training ground, found his place. And then boarded the mecha. As the mecha drove farther away, Lu Anhei gradually lost sight of it. But his eyes still couldn't stop resting on the position he had just taken. Ji Meng didn't smile nor look at him. And didn't even come to his side during the lineup. He didn't know why. But Lu Anhei felt a little sad at this moment. Hey! There was a sudden tap on his back. And Lu Anhei turned back to find that it was an A-class cadet who had approached him for training before. What's wrong? He smiled. I saw you staring at old Ji. The other party hesitated for a moment, before his voice lowered a bit. Were you okay yesterday? Lu Anhei instantly understood that the other was talking about his susceptible period. I saw old Ji in the canteen yesterday. Once he heard that you were in the isolation room, he was as anxious as anything, and left without saying a word. He wouldn't have gone looking for you, would he? Lu Anhei heard these words and was stunned for a moment. He came looking for me. Yes, the other party had no malice, recounted what he saw in the cafeteria, didn't even eat his meal, dumped the things in his hands and left. Those who didn't know thought he was looking for revenge. The other saw Lu Anhei's expression and thought Lu Anhei hadn't seen Ji Meng yesterday, so he didn't come looking for you. No, Lu Anhei subconsciously denied it. Makes sense. What alpha would think of looking for someone during the susceptible period? The other party said and nodded to himself. Lu Anhei, however, felt powerless to even agree. And his mind was filled with the way Ji Meng found him yesterday. But you two have a really good relationship. The A and other cadets thought of something else before they spoke. Sometimes we wonder in private whether old Ji likes you. Lu Anhei's throat was a little dry. What? These brothers' casual guess is just a guess. Just listen and don't take it to heart. The other party waved his hand. After all, an alpha and alpha together isn't something too unusual. Lu Anhei raised his face. Ji Meng driving the mecha was long gone, he couldn't see it anymore. He knew that an alpha and alpha together wasn't something uncommon, and it wasn't as if he hadn't seen one or two such pairs in school before. But in all his perceptions, it didn't include the option of, that person could be him, and the other person was Ji Meng. Lu Anhei tilted his head and joked with the student, maybe. If I'm with Ji, will you cut me off from this? It just so happened that Yi Ling had just finished his test and came out from the training ground. Wen heard the conversation between the two. He said with a big grin, what, who's together? Lu Anhei put on an indifferent attitude, and as if to prove something, he turned to Yi Ling and said, I was telling him that if I was with old Ji, you would all probably cut off friendship with me. Yi Ling, who has always had thick nerves, couldn't understand what Lu Anhei was saying at once, but got a little angry at him for saying this. What kind of bullshit are you talking about? The smile on Lu Anhei's face tightened up a bit. He was just thinking that the friends around him still wouldn't accept it, when he heard Yi Ling continued with a loud voice. What does it matter who you are with and aren't we friends? The big deal is to pay a fine to the higher-ups. How big of a deal is this? Are you looking down on us or on yourself? Oh. You also despise old Lu, Yi Ling huffed a patch, old Lu. You can't, Lu Anhei was a little confused. When Yi Ling saw that he was still dazed, he simply tapped him on the shoulder again, you're not right today, Lu Anhei finally loosened up a bit in his heart, pushed Yi Ling and cursed with a smile, you talk a lot of shit today too. Feeling that Lu Anhei was finally back to normal, Yi Ling choked back 2 sentences unwillingly. A few people talked, and the topic just now was no longer mentioned. As if that was really an insignificant topic, and 2 alphas together was just a small thing, not enough to worry about. The weather was good for the second half of the exam. In the second half of the examination, the weather suddenly became unpleasant. It was fine inside, but there was heavy rain outdoors, and the sky instantly became dark and heavy. Some of the students who finished the test early were allowed to go back to their dormitories first, and there were fewer and fewer people left on the field. Yi Ling went to eat. While Lu Anhe stood in place waiting for the roll call, also thinking about the conversation just now. The susceptible period wasn't an excuse or a cover-up, and perhaps his reaction wasn't an accident. He had a crush on Ji Meng from the start, so when Yi Nan made things difficult for him in the beginning, he chose Ji Meng without any hesitation at all, and never regretted his choice. Now that he thought about it, what he viewed as a good feeling wasn't pure at all. What about the other? Ji Meng seemed to treat very well from the beginning, so well that Lu Anhe didn't dare to think about it deeper. If these good feelings were simple, then yesterday's susceptible period may also be just his worry about himself. If these good feelings weren't simple, then he towards the other. From a long time ago Lu Anhe has always been very confident, but now he began to feel stupid. Too dumb to find an answer. Lu Anhe. Next. The instructor's roll call finally gave him a brief break from these thoughts, and Lu Anhe exhaled. Putting on his hat and heading deeper into the training ground. As he walked toward the Mecca, Lu Anhe saw Ji Meng, who was also walking head-on toward him. Presumably his last test was an individual test outdoors. Ji Meng was soaked in the rain and his clothes were soaked through, but his pace was still confident and relaxed. After all, he was an S-class trainee, and the final test wasn't too difficult for him. Old Ji. Obviously Ji Meng also saw him. So Lu Anhe opened his mouth and called out to him the moment they brushed past each other. Ji Meng stood still, but didn't speak. Lu Anhe was slightly speechless. I have something to ask you. Go back to the dorm first and wait for me, okay? In the past, Ji Meng would have agreed without saying a word, or nod very seriously. But he seemed to have guessed what Lu Anhe wanted to talk to him about, and unexpectedly asked one more question. What do you want to ask? About? Lu Anhe gritted his teeth. About what happened between me and you. Lu Anhe. The instructor saw that he was still not in place and called out his name once more. Go now. Ji Meng didn't answer directly, but just reminded Lu Anhe that it was time to get into position. Lu Anhe grabbed his hand. Remember to wait for me. Ji Meng seemed unwilling to look at him, as if he didn't want to answer Lu Anhe's question. Oh. Lu Anhe was a little anxious. He was afraid that after he went back, he wouldn't be able to find Ji Meng, so he semi-forcibly pinched Ji Meng's chin so that he had to look at him, and only then repeated. Remember to wait for me. It wasn't until this happened that Ji Meng really raised his head. Lu Anhe smelled the rain on the other, and the tips of Ji Meng's hair were all wet, but he still pursed his lips and didn't say anything. Only after taking a deep look at him did he break free from Lu Anhe's shackles, turn his face away, and leave without looking back. Lu Anhe. Here. Lu Anhe took one last look at Ji Meng's departing back and quickly ran to his position after answering loudly. The other's eyes were still engraved in his own. And at that moment, Lu Anhe was hit by something in his heart. And the question that was bothering him just now seemed to have an answer that wasn't invasive. Maybe he also. Lu Anhe knew that he has always been very accurate in reading people. The final examination went on for a long time. Lu Anhe completed the various tests from mecha to personal to spiritual power in turn, before finally receiving his final test results in the satisfied eyes of his instructor. Very good. It was about the last training session, and the always serious instructor finally complimented Lu Anhe in a rare way. It's been a great 2 years. Lu Anhe showed a relaxed smile. So instructor. Actually I did bring snacks on the first day of training. All right. All right. You think I don't know? The instructor saw him rehash the old story, a helpless smile on his face, but didn't mean to punish him for Lu Anhe's surrender. Instead, his tone was a little more reluctant. Behave yourself, or your future superior officers may not be so nice. Go now. You soldiers. Yes. Lu Anhe gave a solemn salute to the instructor and turned to leave. After walking out of the training ground, Lu Anhe suddenly quickened his pace and ran towards the dormitory area. This was the last few days the soldiers would be in the training department. They would return to the military academy with their training results, and then exchange them for the goals they would strive to follow in the future, becoming a real soldier. In a sense, this was also a graduation. When passing by the first floor, Lu Anhe heard Yi Ling and the others already discussing how to contact each other after going out, where they want to go and what they want to do. But he couldn't stop and flew to his room. Lu Anhe remembered that he had also discussed with Ji Meng about what would happen later. At that time, the two had just lived together for a year, and it happened to be a day when the training task was not heavy, so they were able to return to the dormitory early to rest. When the lights went out, neither of them was too sleepy. So Lu Anhe looked at the ceiling and asked Ji Meng what he wanted to do in the darkness. You know, Major, he, the one we saw when we entered the school, seems to have entered the base at that time. Lu Anhe said, I think he's a particularly good soldier. If possible, I would like to enter the base in the future. Ji Meng's voice came from not far away. If you want to, you can definitely do it. What about you? Old Ji. Lu Anhe rolled over on the bed, as if he was closer to Ji Meng. Where are you going to go later? Ji Meng took a long time to speak this time. Because the lights were off, Lu Anhe couldn't see anything. He only heard Ji Meng's voice very softly and said, I'll probably go to the border area. Huh, Lu Anhe froze. The border area is too far away. I thought if you were also entering the base, maybe we could see each other from time to time. At that time, Ji Meng seemed to laugh for a moment and paused for 2 seconds before continuing. You still want to be my roommate at the base? What's wrong with that? Lu Anhe didn't think too much about it at that time, and said without thinking. After all, I can't find another person as good as old Ji. Hearing these words, Ji Meng this time was really silent, and only after a long time did he lightly smile and say, oh. And now these images are flashing through Lu Anhe's mind one by one. So what did he say at that time? He ran so fast that he forgot how to catch his breath, and sweat seeped on his forehead as he ran like a new recruit to the dormitory. Lu Anhe impatiently pushed open the door. Old Ji. The only answer he got was an empty room. Ji Meng didn't seem to have returned in the few hours that he did the test. The desk was still the same communicator he had placed on it a day ago. The closet was still open. And it looked like it had only been here once briefly. From the time he found himself in the isolation room, he stayed with him all night, then came back and took a quick shower and left again, to the end of training. And never came back. He remembered that look in his eyes when they last looked at each other. Where would Ji Meng go? Would he leave without saying goodbye? After all, the completion of the final examination, wanting to leave here wasn't a difficult task. Lu Anhe sat on the ground and began to think. Lu Anhe tried to force himself to calm down and think properly, but he was anxious all over again after a few minutes. He wanted to go to Ji Meng, but he didn't have any clue. Lu Anhe buried himself in his lap and finally began to analyze where Ji Meng might have gone, and where he should start looking for him if he was really gone. Just as he was listing the third option, his communicator suddenly rang. He was so excited that he remembered that Ji Meng didn't even take his communicator when he left, and his mood dropped again. As he opened his communicator, Yi Ling's voice rang out, Old Lu. Lu Anhe, yes. Hey no. What's with this voice? Yi Ling asked. Lu Anhe thought that Yi Ling came over to find him to talk about going out to a party later or something like that, and just wanted to interrupt him to let him talk later. But Yi Ling sighed from across the room, Are you looking for Ji Meng? Hearing him say that, Lu Anhe stopped. What's wrong with him? I don't know what happened to you yesterday. Yi Ling's tone was rare and serious, and I don't know why he arrived just after your susceptibility period. Yi Ling said. I guess he's in the isolation room. Someone just passed by and said they saw him. I heard that you were in there yesterday. Yi Ling didn't point out that Lu Anhe didn't admit that Ji Meng had been there. I just wanted to let you know. Lu Anhe cupped his communicator. Thank you. Come on. Don't mention it. The always thick-headed Yi Ling paused. Just remember what I told you today. No matter what. You and old Ji are our friends. Lu Anhe opened the door and ran fast again to the isolation room while speaking in the communicator. Got it. Okay. I'll stop here. I don't care about anything else. Yi Ling laughed at the other end. After all, we have a weak mouth. If there's a chance to bring you back snacks later, Lu Anhei hung up the phone and started running at full speed. Under what circumstances does an alpha get through their susceptibility period? Lu Anhei thought as he ran. This kind of physiological knowledge was naturally taught in school early, mostly to make alphas self-disciplined and not to be defeated by their biological instincts. At that time, the class said that maybe there was an omega beside them, maybe because of anger. Maybe because of the violent fluctuations of emotions. Later the physiology teacher added that some alphas, of course, also had the possibility of advance when they were with the subject of their sexual impulses, sometimes not limited to alphas. He felt the answer was close at hand. Lu Anhei couldn't wait a second to arrive at the place he just left in the morning. After all, it was closed. And basically no one will go this way. It was only a day and a night. And it was surprising that his mood would be so upside down when he walked here again. But he couldn't pretend to know nothing after finding out about it and get along with each other as friends. If today wasn't the end of their training, maybe he would slow down a bit, change the time and place and then slowly talk about it, but he couldn't wait. This was the last day, if he didn't solve it now. Then Ji Meng wouldn't hold the regret of going to the border area alone, and then they would keep missing each other, until the two of them put down the ridiculous-looking ideas and heartbeats. What a pity that would be. Lu Anhei thought this, gathered the courage to walk through the door, and after walking through the long corridor, they finally saw each other through a glass door in the place where he had been. Ji Meng looked as if he was having a harder time than him, and he was crouched on the couch with his back to him, his two hands trembling holding a corner of the sofa, after looking carefully. The floor even had drops of sweat on it. In this moment of seeing him, Lu Anhei suddenly understood the mood of Ji Meng, who was standing here a day ago. He just wanted to knock on the door to enter, but just as his hand touched the glass, the door of the isolation room silently opened. It may be that Ji Meng didn't pay attention when he came, but even forgot to lock the door. The person lying on the couch didn't seem to notice anyone coming in until Lu Anhei dropped the lock with a crisp sound, only then did the other person turn his head and stare dead at the person coming in. The moment their eyes met, Ji Meng hadn't had time to withdraw his defensive eyes, and looked over with even a touch of icy ruthlessness. After noticing who it was, the other instantly withdrew the almost horrible sight, as if even his breathing was suspended, only to watch in a daze as the visitor approached him little by little. Old Ji. Lu Anhei stood in front of him and stretched out a hand to him, trying to pull him up. Why didn't you tell me? His words were vague. Not sure if he was asking, why didn't you tell me about your susceptibility before the test? Or, why didn't you tell me anything for the past 2 years? Ji Meng's lips were a little dry. And his voice was soft. He seemed to want to reach out and grab Lu Anhei, but somehow ended up backing off. Ji Meng tilted his head to look at him, but only said a low apology, I'm sorry. Lu Anhei didn't know what he had to apologize for. You figured it out. Right. Ji Meng didn't extend his hand, but looked at him as he spoke. Yes. Lu Anhei didn't hesitate to nod, that's why I asked you to wait for me in the dormitory. Ji Meng was silent and didn't answer. Lu Anhei didn't know the meaning of his attitude, but he couldn't bear to see the other in distress, so he simply put out both of his hands and helped Ji Meng up a little from the sofa, and sat himself next to him again. Don't you have anything to tell me? Lu Anhei asked. I do. Ji Meng spoke up this time after a long time. Okay. Then I will speak first. He didn't expect that Lu Anhei didn't follow the rules, not wanting Ji Meng to continue speaking, and interrupted him, Old Ji. I am rather slow, yes. I mean I can't find out in some aspects. Fortunately yesterday, Lu Anhei was just about to go on, when he unexpectedly saw Ji Meng's body start to shake. Originally thought that the other party wasn't uncomfortable, but he came closer to see. Only to find that Ji Meng's eyes were unexpectedly red. Can you not say that first? The ruthlessness that was on the other when he pushed the door open was no longer to be found, so Lu Anhei felt that at this time Ji Meng was begging him almost with a bit of aggression, so he repeated. I know what you want to say, tell me tomorrow, okay. Lu Anhei was confused. But his body acted first and went up to hug the other just like Ji Meng had hugged him half-jokingly a day ago. What's wrong? The moment his hands touched Ji Meng's back, the other was almost eager to come up and hug him back with great force, but only said, tell me tomorrow, now hug me first. Ji Meng pillowed him. Lu Anhe was so interrupted by him that he also didn't know how to continue. The person who smiled lightly yesterday and asked him, "Want to bite?" suddenly became vulnerable, and he could only hold him tightly like he told him to. "I know I shouldn't have come to you yesterday, but even if I did," Lu Anhe heard the other party's shaky voice come through, "I really couldn't help it. It's been 2 years. I was afraid I wouldn't see you again, so I wanted to be capricious." Hearing this, Lu Anhe noticed something, raised his hand to touch Ji Meng's face, and surprisingly his hand touched wetness. He was actually crying. Crying. Lu Anhe's heart tightened. Ji Meng seemed to be always smiling at him, like a clear and handsome teenager, showing 1,000 expressions, but never shed a tear. "I noticed it too late. I didn't pay attention." Lu Anhe didn't bother to look at Ji Meng's face at this moment, only comforted him. "It's my fault." He finally heard a distinct sob. The emotions that the teenager had held back for 2 years seemed to finally burst out at this moment. "But I miss you. I long for you. I didn't know I'd fall for an alpha either, I didn't know." Lu Anhe's heart began to hurt with a sudden twinge. Ji Meng wasn't crying hard, he was just aggrieved and sad, but then said the same thing just now, so even if you know, tell me tomorrow. Tell me tomorrow, reject me tomorrow." Lu Anhe heard these words before he really froze. Why do you say that?" Ji Meng buried his head in the nook of his shoulder. Lu Anhe felt the moisture of tears spraying over, finally didn't hold back, wrenching Ji Meng's chin, making him look up at him. "You think I'm here to reject you?" Ji Meng reluctantly collected his tears, but his eyes were still red with a wet watery glow, and his lips were trembling. "You're not. Not because I had to see you during your susceptible period and did that." Ji Meng drew a breath, "But I really can't help it. You said so yourself that you wanted me to hug you, how could I not be moved?" Lu Anhe suddenly felt that an alpha was no different from those betas and omegas. Liking someone wasn't just a word. And he began to feel that an alpha's emotion like that was kind of cute. For example, this one in front of him. He was heartbroken by Ji Meng's inferiority complex, but he also felt that he was the cutest person in the world, and all those uncertainties and doubts disappeared on their own. "No," he said deliberately. Ji Meng's eyes widened, and even the crying stopped, asking incredulously, "Is that?" The way he knowingly asked was really cute, not to mention the fact that Ji Meng's face was finally a little more red, like the excitement and blush that would unconsciously come out when he was about to get an answer. Lu Anhe couldn't resist lowering his head and biting heavily on the other's lips. "I just figured out one thing." The sudden kiss made the color of Ji Meng's cheeks more and more obvious. His eyes blinked and kept asking like a child who wanted an answer to everything. "What?" "You see," Lu Anhe said fervently after regaining his composure, "we are both male." Ji Meng nodded. "MN. And all alpha." Ji Meng, "Oh. So is it a problem for us to have a relationship?" Ji Meng, "Huh. Don't. Huh. It's just like that." Lu Anhe didn't care if his strange and sophomoric reasoning was transmitted to the other party, anyway. After he finished the sentence he was unexpectedly justified. It was only now that Ji Meng was finally convinced that Lu Anhe had really confessed to him on the last day of his graduation, and that he was really not dreaming. And could really welcome this relationship that he hadn't even dared to think about. So he finally dared to say some things out loud. For example, he really didn't mean anything else when he was talking to Lu Anhe, and he didn't think he would like an alpha, but Lu Anhe always made him unable to take his eyes off of him, and he used to have some low self-esteem, so naturally he inevitably wanted to chase the sun. But before saying that, he suddenly heard Lu Anhe ask, "Is it bitter?" Ji Meng froze for a moment, thinking that the other party was talking about his pheromone. The taste of his pheromone was coffee, and Lu Anhe added after asking those 2 words, "Is it bitter to like someone for so long?" Ji Meng understood the other's meaning. He finally smiled, shook his head and said, "Not bitter," then stopped hiding his pheromone and released it without reservation. So Lu Anhe leaned down once again and kissed him again very hard. When they were both gasping for breath and separated, Ji Meng nudged Lu Anhe and said, "By the way, let me show you something. I used to have dreams," Ji Meng said. "I thought you could never be with me. But I was afraid that one day I wouldn't be able to control myself and would take advantage of my susceptibility to do something that I couldn't undo. That's why I carry this with me during my susceptible period." Lu Anhei watched as Ji Meng pulled out a medal from the corner of the isolation room. It was actually a bite stopper. It was for the most despicable alpha, something they had seen back then, worn only by the irrational, horrible alphas locked up in special prisons. I was telling myself that if I really went crazy and put the bite stopper on before I was about to lose control of myself, it's okay to be ashamed. But I was afraid I wouldn't be able to resist trying to bite you. Yesterday too. During the time I was holding you, I was about to go crazy thinking about it. Otherwise the susceptibility period wouldn't be early, he said while putting that thing on. Ji Meng wore a bite stopper on his face, the mask covered half of his face, and the metal strap was fastened to the back of his head, then said to Lu Anhei. This way. I can't hurt you even if I'm crazy. Isn't that silly? Lu Anhei could only see Ji Meng's pale, reddened lips from his kisses through those small holes, surrounded by each other's pheromone, which was an absolutely intense stimulus no matter which way you look at it. He heard Ji Meng tell him. Look. I won't bite now, I'm a very good alpha. You can mark me. Ji Meng smiled at him through the bite stopper, mark me. Okay. The second after he said that, the other's canine teeth bit down on him viciously, a sudden sharp pain came from the back of his neck. And he tensed his toes instantly in pain as the alpha's pheromone pressed over in an overwhelming manner, colliding with his own pheromone and exploding with a dense, devastatingly violent reaction. Obviously there should only be simple pain, feeling a flow of blood, but Ji Meng tilted his face up and smiled, the bite stopper shone metallic under the bright incandescent light. I love you too, he said. Like animals tearing at each other, what was wrong with becoming bloodied? It didn't matter if you couldn't mark each other, think of it as branding with a scar, which was proof that you love me too. Pain. Madness. Horror and beast-like desire that was an alpha. As they begged for mercy. Chapter 132 End. 1. The people of the Empire were looking forward to a wedding these days. After all, Wen Zhao was too low-key, and now that the truth was out, everyone, without exception, began to feel sorry for their sire. So this emotion was gradually transferred to their new prince. They felt sorry for him and admired his strength. They wanted him to be happy with his alpha. 2. When Tianyao ended up staying on the main planet, he didn't ask for anything. Dismissed all his men and found a quiet corner in the P area to stay. I can't say I'm jealous. Just a little emotional. 3. He used to act like a pro people, but refused to really let go of his identity. The baggage was too heavy, and bore some blind adoration. This adoration after the identity was revealed was also quickly gone. Because he actually knew early on that he wasn't Wen Zhao's own child, yet he wanted to sit in this position desperately. 4. He just realized that it wasn't enough to pretend in some things and paste the appearance to capture the hearts of the people. Just like the prince was doing now. 5. The previous attempt to get close to some clues through Lin Han was actually under the compulsion of Shi Yuan. So at one point he thought he was pro-radical. 6. The peacemakers were angry, especially Zhang Lian, who said that he and Xu Ziong were really just friends, and that his position had nothing to do with the peacemakers. Not to mention that what Xu Ziong did was what the moderate party should do. 7. The radicals were also very confused. The black pot has been carried for so long, not to mention the fact that their head once held a collusion with Wen Tianyao hat. What the hell? The universe was proof that they have never had the slightest thought of cooperating with Wen Tianyao. 8. Therefore the council maintained a peaceful existence for several years. Tired. The old men didn't want to fight. 9. But the people's eagerly awaited wedding was still delayed. Because after M.2742 was blown up, Lin Han was still in the research institute all day tinkering with his new mech design. 10. Many people had previously asked if this mech would be put into mass production, but due to the special attributes and definitions, as well as the two-person piloting and mental control system, they could only accept with a sigh that this mech was only a personal order for the Lord General. After the return of peace, the people became bored and named this mecha. 11. Of course the last one didn't work. 12. 6 months later, the new mech was officially completed. The first test flight was scheduled at the training ground of the base, and it was inevitably surrounded by people when it was transported from the institute to the base. There was a lot of discussion on the internet. 13. I saw the new mech designed by His Royal Highness himself. Ah. So handsome. I finally understand why there's only this one. I always thought M.2742 was handsome before, sorry I was too shallow. That shape. That design in the latest accumulator and arsenal, I'm shedding tears. I'm not a mechanic, but I'm starting to sour. Beta Rush Squad came to Sightsee. Beta Marriage Squad came to Sightsee +1. So when exactly will they get married? In fact, I personally feel that the last makeup bar mitzvah in my mind is already a wedding. Too romantic. I'm crying. Marriage, 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 marriage. 14. When the new mechs finally managed to arrive at the base's training ground, Lin Han thanked the people responsible for transporting them over and gave them 2 more instructions to go back first. When they left, he was the only one left at the training ground. But he didn't have to wait too long. A few minutes later a verification sound came from the large space, the electronic door opened and a man in military uniform walked in. 15. Lin Han smiled the moment he met him at eye level. The two had not seen each other for a long time, and recently the closing work was too mixed and too busy, so he simply lived in the institute to live in the new mech, until the last bit of fine optimization was also confirmed correct, without a moment's delay. It was shipped over, so now he looked slightly haggard, because there was no special care, and although the uniform was newly changed, the back of his head still had a few soft bilk hair standing up, looking not quite the same as in the past. Feeling a large hand over his face, Lin Han tilted his head and curled his eyes. It's okay. He Yunting smiled lightly as a response. Okay. Lin Han followed He Yunting's palm and rubbed his face with it, before covering his hand into his own and pulling him along. Come up to take a look. 16. This new mech was undoubtedly one of the top ones in the current Imperial mech squad. It was nearly twice as big as M.2742 and had smoother lines, reflecting light that was cold and blinding at midday. In the middle of the fuselage was a huge turbine engine, new heavy cannons were added to both arms, and in addition to some drastic new changes, there were countless other painstaking details. After boarding the mech from the elevator, the 2 cockpits were much wider than the original, but this time the second cockpit was no longer an accessory to the icing on the cake, but side by side with the first. Reached directly across a crossbar, closer together. I will work out hard and try not to hold you back. He learned that a large part of the reason his physique was so poor was because his mother destroyed her glands when she was pregnant, which more or less had an effect on him. Lin Han reached out and hooked his hand around He Yunting's neck, pressing the tip of his nose against his skin. Recently he began to like to do some harmless, but little capricious actions in places where there were few people, if there was no one around. Then it could be a little more excessive. He sometimes laughed at himself, wondering if he was getting younger mentally. After all, he wasn't that unstable when he was alone before. But the other didn't mind at all, and even became more and more indulgent, as if to make up for the time before they met, when perhaps Lin Han should have been like this, carefree as a spoiled teenager. He Yunting wrapped his arm around Lin Han's waist and pressed him a little tighter into his arms. It's a double cockpit. Not a double driver's seat. Lin Han buried in the middle of his neck and smiled, sniffing the clean smell of his body. His lips brushing over very lightly as if on purpose. Is the general going to hold me and try it together? I'm afraid it will affect your driving. 17. He Yunting held Lin Han steady, proving with his actions that this wasn't a problem for him at all. 18. His engine armor, after connecting to the system, finally heard a long-lost, gentle voice that belonged only to him. Lin Han came up to bite his ear, laughed softly, and spoke at the same time as the voice in the system. 19. Mr. Lin said that he will always love you. You are invincible. 20. After all, it was only indoors and only basic tests could be conducted, which didn't take too long. The test flight was a success, and the new mech was perfect in every way. After making sure that the most basic functions were foolproof, it was time for the field tests. Usually the choice was to go to a substar or other place that wasn't too far away, but this time the general had other options. 21. Everyone knew that the new mech was the envy of all the pilots who wanted to have it. But no one knew what the little greenhouse on top of the mecha was for. Lin Han designed it with a small house away from the engine and armory, making it less noticeable in the doubly enlarged mech compartment. The top was specially installed with a dry and intelligent circulation system, equipped with anti-collision devices. And even thoughtfully installed with special soft cushions, it looked like it was prepared for a certain little one who loved to faint in mechs. 22. Therefore the field test flight became the general's rare use of his annual exhaustive vacation. The destination was what no one expected. A distant galaxy of oddbound creatures. Only the two of them knew that they were going to take a homesick black fluffy blob back for a visit. 23. Even though everyone believed in Lin Han's strength as a mech master, they still cautiously asked him to bring a few more nutrient solutions. Although Wen Zhao didn't say a word, he actually almost put himself down and contacted the Federation, which was closer to here, to ask for the necessary assistance in case of emergency. Lin Han knew that Wen Zhao wanted to compensate him, but there was nothing wrong with him, he was also a victim. Wen Zhao was silent for a long time after returning from the exhibition hall that day, and when he faced Lin Han again, he wasn't as spontaneous as before when he didn't know his identity. But Lin Han thought that he would one day make good on his promise to play chess with Wen Zhaoge. Although there were some words he couldn't open his mouth right now. 24. In the end, Wen Zhao chose to believe in He Yunting's strength and let the two go together. After all, the fortress was defended, so the two could go out for a little trip, no big deal. The emperor convinced himself like so. But he was also a little relieved. It is as if what Su Zuran left behind wasn't all despair and sadness, on the contrary. As much light and love with gentle colors. 25. Ger realized something after hearing Lin Han say the word, home. He started jumping up and down. His excitement was so big that even He Yunting, who was driving, the originally cold frowning man, even reached out to touch its fur. But after the ecstasy, it gradually stopped and began to rub against Lin Han little by little. Its small eyes were covered by the hair so that it couldn't be seen, and finally the whole dumpling completely nestled in Lin Han's hand. Only then did Lin Han realize that the little guy actually had some emotions of being close to home. It's nothing. Lin Han smiled and said slowly to it, we'll accompany you. The mech was given a makeover, and you won't get dizzy anymore. Don't be afraid. Don't you want to see your friends? Only then did the little dumpling re-emerge from his hand, stretching out its claws to grab his clothes and climb upwards, finally stopping at the shoulder and extending its little pink tongue to quietly lick the side of Lin Han's neck. 26. Then he was taken away by the big man and locked out of the room and not allowed to come in. It wasn't until the next day that he followed Lin Han onto his new mech and sulked in his new nest. This time it must take more than a week to forgive that bad-tempered human. 27. After all this time, the general was still jealous of this strange creature. 28. Probably because of the different state of mind, when they came to this place again, both of them were a bit emotional. They didn't stop at the border area, and directly followed the coordinates and landed at the place where the two had stayed for a long time at that time. The place had changed a bit from last time, but the hills and lakes were still there, so it wasn't hard to recognize them. He Yunting parked the mech and whispered, "Here we are." Lin Han got down from the other side of the driver's seat and came over to take He Yunting's hand. He knocked on the small house inside the cabin and gently woke up the little one who was asleep inside. We're home. 29. The oddbound biosystem was gravitational, and there was more than one Ger, too. But Lin Han still recognized his own little dumpling precisely as it ran off to find its companions. It hadn't been this happy in a long time. Squealing and rolling around, clapping its paws with its kind before running off again to a new place with a new grunt. 30. As the group of little black clusters played happily, Lin Han leaned on He Yunting's shoulder and waited for the sunset. His skin was very white and he squinted slightly when the light came through. Noticing his movements, He Yunting would turn his head and use his body to block the sunlight for him, and in the meantime, he would receive a kiss that wasn't too long nor too short. 31. It also took the two to its best friend Thud Thud as usual, and even more amazingly those big guys still recognized them. Even as a gesture of friendship. It repeated the action that had nearly brought He Yunting down at the time. The first Thud Thud pulled its back paws back to greet the second Thud Thud in this strange and familiar pose. The second big guy mooed twice, tossed his ears and leaned down, cupped the first one's hind paws with his own front paws, and kissed it with his thick lips. 32. Although he has long confessed to stealing a kiss, He Yunting still tensed his face and didn't want to turn his head to look. Lin Han laughed so hard that his eyes weren't visible, and only after he finished laughing did he hold He Yunting's face and start kissing. What are you shy about? 34. I'm not. So humiliating. Approximately 35. Lin Han went to kiss his mouth again in front of these big guys. Do you think they will learn this? 36. When Guri rolled next to Lin Han, the fur on his body was wrapped in a layer of dust. It was still wet to the touch, so he probably played too intensely. He saw the lake in front of the mound and said to it, "Go and wash it." The little donut wasn't moved. Lin Han was a bit puzzled at first. He clearly remembered that when he and He Yunting were trapped here, Gur would jump into the water by itself when he had enough playing. Only when the little guy pampered himself and rubbed his palm, did Lin Han pick up on its hint and smiled helplessly. 37. He walked over with Gur in his hand, squatted down and bathed it carefully, and gently massaged it with his fingers. The fur ball that was wet with water let out a comfortable purr. 38. He was so spoiled that he had to be washed by Lin Han before he would wash itself. 39. The days were long here. And last time Lin Han's body function was too poor without nutrients, so he basically didn't move much in the same place. Lin Han stood up first. Then took He Yunting's hand and dragged him up as well. Carry me. The more you live, the more you go back. Like a child. 40. Lin Han then hugged his neck and leaned on him, and the two of them chatted with each other. 41. I was so sleepy last time, it seemed like I was sleeping all the time. So are you sleepy now? Not sleepy. Do you want something to eat? It's on the mech. No. Then walk a little longer. 42. He Yunting walked very steadily, and Lin Han's voice was gentle. 43. He Yunting. Just calling your name, okay. He Yunting. General. Senior. 44. I love you. 45. I'll always love you too. Approximately 46. By the time the two of them slowly walked back to the mech, Gur was lying on the Thud's nose. Seeing Lin Han coming, also because he was too tired from playing, he just symbolically shook his little tail to show his welcome. Lin Han was in a good mood. Not at all sleepy. If you drive the mech all the way north, is that the border area? Yeah. He said, oh. Do you want to see the Arinarong Nebula? He Yunting asked him. You guessed it, Lin Han admitted. Can't you see it from here? He Yunting nodded his head and brought him water. Lin Han held the water and took a few sips, blinking. But the starry sky over here is also very nice. It's different from the core area. Every place had its unique scenery. And he stretched out his hand to feel the night and warm breeze from here, smiling back at He Yunting. I like it a lot. The man walked over, so they looked at each other naturally. He Yunting's always flat uniform pockets seemed to see the angles of something as he reached out to touch Lin Han's face, then leaned down to kiss his forehead. Then he knelt down on one knee in front of the youth. 47. Lin Han's surprise was only momentary, and then his eyes curved up. He Yunting had never intended to hide it from him. But the reason why Lin Han hadn't read his heart in relation to this before was entirely because the other party had simply made a decision at this moment. In such a mundane moment. The simple wind during this moment, the simple clouds during this moment, the simple stars during this moment. At this moment in the gentle as velvet wind, at this moment with a little blush wanting to slightly scatter the clouds, at this moment with twinkling bright stars. He saw the ring on He Yunting's hand. Very simple style. With a little something embedded in the middle. The meteorite in the display. He Yunting explained, it's a part of my memory. So I'd never lose you. Lin Han felt a little sour in his eyes and the tip of his nose. He wasn't someone who needed rituals very much. In fact, being able to be with each other had used up enough of his luck to span the galaxy. Gur saw the movement over here, but unexpectedly continued to lie on the Thud's nose without disturbing. He Yunting took hold of his fingers and dropped a sloppy kiss. My prince. He looked up at Lin Han and smiled. You just said that the starry sky here is beautiful. Then how about right here? He gazed at the other party. Do you want to marry me? 48. If you say yes, can you kiss me? Approximately 49. Lin Han heard a very distant voice. Like a blue ocean a billion light years away, blooming with some summer dream, a little drop of tenderness, all slowly fell into his heart. 50. I do. 51. They kissed. 52. The mech's skylight was half open, and lying in the driver's seat gave a unique view of the planet's starry sky. A few unopened suppressant packages were thrown on the metal floor, and the air was filled with the smell of intertwined pheromones. I knew my rut would come these days. Lin Han's lips were slick with water and his eyes had a touch of wetness from the kiss. He gasped and pivoted himself off of He Yun-ting, propping one hand on his chest and tugging at his ribbon suggestively. Do you remember what you said once? He went down the line, word for word. I'm all yours now. So, Lin Han volunteered, re-ambling down, his thin white wrists piercingly inviting. Do you want to wrap the ribbon around my hands? Or blindfold me? Lin Han, He Yun-ting's voice was soft. Is it okay here? His heartfelt voice was unprecedentedly straightforward. Tilda want to kiss you all the time all the time. Tilda. When He Yun-ting saw Lin Han use his mouth to bite his ribbon off, he reached out and wrapped it around the other. Tilda want to love you. Tilda. His breathing became less steady and the tip of his tongue carried a hot temperature. Tilda want to make love with you here. Tilda. He reversed his position and pressed Lin Han downward, his lips touching his glands. Tilda want to mark you here forever. Approximately 53. It's okay. Lin Han narrowed his eyes and smiled. I'm not afraid of pain. Just hold me tight. 54. The mecha stopped under the starry sky, from night until day, to the point where even Gur smelled a bit of the sweet scent of caramel and squeaked excitedly, poking the Thud-Thud's nose. 55. He Yun-ting pressed his hips, a bit of blood remained at the corner of his mouth, and there were drops of sweat falling on the almost transparent white skin. He felt the Omega's tenderness and tolerance with unmistakable clarity, ebbing and flowing in waves of resolute union. Lin Han. His fingers covered the other party's waist that was so soft it collapsed, half-truth. Give me a child. 56. Gur wondered why Lin Han hadn't gotten off the mech for 2 days. But it could smell the pheromones, so it wasn't worried that they would leave it behind. It was just a little hard for the dumpling that couldn't find an answer. 57. They only returned on the 4th day. The two made a deal with Gur that they would come back to see its friends later. 58. Gur didn't get dizzy from the mech and didn't cry this time. 59. The people of the Empire finally got the wedding they had been waiting for. The two, wearing black and white suits, walked hand in hand down the long corridor and through the grand gardens, as everyone had imagined. The swings swung very gently in the wind, as tenderly as when they kissed under the bells. They heard that His Royal Highness had finally named the new mech. All those previous solicitations didn't work. The name of the mecha was Star of Enlightenment. The story will be long. They still loved each other. The end. The author has something to say. It's over. These 3 words are really emotional, and once again, I thank all the readers for their company in the past 6 months. Bow down. This is my personal favorite ending. I really like Han Han and Lao He. And I am really trying with all my efforts to write about 2 gentle people. I hope you will like it. I hope you will like it. There will be a physical, interested readers can pay attention in VB. Lastly, I beg you all to give a 5-star review QWQ. See me warp.